Chapter 229. As the absolute soul of the Border Control Corps, Dongqing Wudi had been at the forefront of the Thunderbolt Battalion from beginning to end, facing the densest and most ferocious fangs of the enemy. The bloody battle went from morning to noon and into the night. Dongqing Wudi had long forgotten how many people he had killed. He took bottles of military stimulants that could maintain his physical strength. The absolute power turned into sword light all over the sky. The sword rain was torrential, and the wind and thunder were roaring. He had been standing at the forefront of the battle line, facing the splashing rain of blood and never retreating. Everyone in the Thunderbolt Battalion was following his footsteps. The elite army of more than 10,000 people seemed to be completely integrated with him. As long as he was still standing at the forefront, the people in the rear would not retreat even if they died. Advance. Advance like crazy. In more than 10 hours, Dongqing Wudi took the lead and directly pushed forward the battle line by nearly 6 kilometers, and the distance was still expanding. The number of the enemy was actually far more than the 10,000 people of the Thunderbolt Battalion. The enemy's number was even close to 40,000 people. The disadvantage of the Border Control Corps was the number, while the disadvantage of the enemy was firepower, combat capability, and morale. The firepower was barely bearable, but the combat capability and morale could not be made up. As the most elite large army of Zhongzhou State, the combat capability of the Border Control Corps was second to none in the world. The Thunderbolt Battalion was the trump card of the Border Control Corps. In this battle, they were backed by the Blood Battalion, and the rear was supported by a lot of firepower from the Blood Battalion. At the forefront, their marshal was fighting the enemy bravely. In the battlefield of artillery fire, the Thunderbolt Battalion might be tired, but as long as Dongqing Wudi was still at the front, their morale would not weaken. The four gods of Zhongzhou State. In terms of combat capability, Dongqing Wudi was far inferior to Gu Xingyun, who was known as the god of war. In terms of strategy, he seemed to be inferior to Yi Dongsheng, the god of army. In terms of mystery, he could not compare with Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god. But Dongqing Wudi's killing intent and bravery could always burst out incisively and vividly at the most critical moment. He took the lead and would not retreat until he died. With him around, the entire Border Control Corps could erupt with an incredible fierceness and madness. He was the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, and also the soul of the Border Control Corps. There were nearly 3 million troops in Zhongzhou State, 5 theater of operations, an independent theater of operations, a Border Control Corps and special forces of all sizes. In the past 100 years, no one had been as prestigious as Dongqing Wudi and his army. Just like before the Thunderbolt Legion marched in, Dongqing Wudi was saluting Zhongzhou State. But the Border Control Corps was saluting the marshal. Kill! In the blood-spattered night, Dongqing Wudi roared. His voice had long been hoarse, but it was indescribably majestic and heroic in the night. The artillery roared behind him and exploded into the enemy's rear. Dazzling shadows danced on the front line, and the intense gunshots became sparser and sparser. Only sword lights continued to flash on the battlefield. Dongqing Wudi had wounds all over his body. Blood gushed out of his body, and some parts of his body had become numb. He took out the last bottle of military stimulant and poured it into his mouth. He waved the long sword in his hand, and his eyes became more and more fierce and frenzied. In his sight, countless enemies rushed up again, roaring and attacking him. These people could be regarded as elites, but most of them had not entered the 4 realms of martial arts. Not to mention the ice-condensing realm and fire-flaming realm. Even the chi-controlling realm was pitifully small. Black clothes, no badges, no military flags, and no origin. Dongqing Wudi had seen several familiar figures in the crowd. They were the targets of Annan State that the Border Control Corps focused on. But now Scorpion in Annan State rebelled, and the Northern Army went south to quell the rebellion. Everything made sense. At least on the surface, these black-clothed enemies, who suddenly appeared, had no position and were only related to the 5 dark forces in the dark world. Dongqing Wudi didn't want to know who these people were. In his eyes, these people existed for only one purpose. That was to be cannon fodder to consume his own combat effectiveness. After more than 10 hours of fierce fighting, the elite experts of the 5 dark forces still hadn't appeared. When their physical strength was about to be exhausted, and their ammunition was completely exhausted, the real battle had just begun. Dongqing Wudi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes became more and more upright. Boom, boom, boom. There was a sudden roar in the blood-red night sky. The huge sound came from an unknown place in the sky, but it was so clear on the ground, like thunder and an explosion. In the flying sword light, Dongqing Wudi suddenly looked up at the night sky. General, that is Shihanbing, who had been rushing behind Dongqing Wudi, asked breathlessly. His face was pale, and his body was shaking, as if he would fall down at any time. Enemy. Dongqing Wudi whispered, the real enemy. Boom. An unprecedented loud noise suddenly sounded in the sky beyond everyone's sight, and the blood-red night sky suddenly lit up in the highest place. The loud noise spread in the air, and the instantaneous light suddenly illuminated a large area of the blood-red night sky. The raging fire in the air seemed to burn up the sky. In the loud noise, messy sounds rang out one after another. The first fire had not been extinguished, but groups of fire had begun to bloom in the air. The sky within a radius of more than 10 kilometers was almost completely covered by the fire. The night sky was covered by the fire. Little by little, the fire became more and more erratic in the air, rising or falling, and finally fell to the ground in a struggle. It was a large number of fireballs scattered, smashing to the battlefield below, like meteors. The battle on the whole battlefield seemed to be affected by the sudden change, and gradually eased. The fireballs in the sky kept approaching the ground, and huge pieces of burning metal rubbed against the air and fell down. For a moment, there was no distinction between the enemy and the enemy. The fireballs fell everywhere, and the whole forest began to burn in the flames. Wreckage. That's the butterfly team. The butterfly team of the Heroes Club. Shihanbing suddenly reacted. He took a deep breath, and his expression was complicated. Damn it, these bastards are really willing to pay a heavy price. Wang Wantian cursed out loud. His entire face had changed. What kept falling from the sky was not weapons at all, but the wreckage of a large number of fighter planes. The battle in the sky was only for a moment, but at least 7 or 8 fighter planes fell. Some of them belonged to Zhongzhou State, but the others were the famous Butterfly Fighter. Butterfly Fighter, one of the air forces of the Heroes Club. The specific number was unknown to the outside world, but there would be no more than 3 formations at most. The battle in the air was still going on. Judging from the scale, this time the Heroes Club had put in at least 1 formation of Butterfly Fighter, which was totally a heavy price. As soon as the real enemy appeared, they sent out Butterfly Fighter. What else would come later? The huge fireballs in the air were still falling. A section of a black wing burning with flames fell to the ground, and the raging fire instantly engulfed the forest for tens of meters. The corner of Dongqing Wudi's mouth twitched, and he said coldly, Eagle Fighter. The Eagle Fighter of the Jiang family of South America was not much less famous than the Butterfly Fighter in the Dark World. This kind of super force in the Dark World had always pursued the principle of quality over quantity. Whether it was Eagle Fighter or Butterfly Fighter, their advanced level could be said to be the best, which was also one of their strongest trump cards. If the Butterfly Fighter sent out a formation, the number of Eagle Fighter could not be much less. Since the 2 teams had put in a lot of money, the other 3 teams could not stand by and do nothing. Now in the air, there were probably 5 formations of the best. 100 fighter planes with the best performance. It's really a big deal. But 2 intimidating teams came to the border of Zhongzhou State to behave atrociously. Damn it, do they think that Zhongzhou State has no air force? Or do they think that our Border Control Corps has no air force? Do they want to succeed with just these 2 formations? Wang Wantian grinned, suddenly picked up the walkie-talkie at his waist and roared, Give the order. Don't worry. Dongqing Wudi suddenly spoke. His expression became a little strange for a moment, and then he said slowly, Wantian, give the order. Let our fighter planes lower their altitude, slowly deal with them, save our strength, and wait for an opportunity. What opportunity? Wang Wantian and Shihanbing asked at the same time. Some strength can be saved, so don't waste it. Dongqing Wudi's expression was complicated. It was a kind of relaxed but extremely angry emotion. Since they want to use the team as bait, Then let's fulfill their wish. He took a deep breath and suddenly raised the long sword in his hand. Come with me, let's slaughter this group of bastards. In the high sky, the violent sound, as if the sky and the earth were collapsing, kept surging. In the sky and on the ground, there were fights everywhere. Fighter planes fell one after another, and the fierce fire kept spreading in the crowd. In the burning sky, as the Zhongzhou fighter planes lowered their altitude, the fighter planes of the 5 teams also vaguely appeared under the curtain of night. The light spots flying at high speed became more and more obvious. One advanced and one retreated. The Zhongzhou fighter planes that took off in a hurry were almost at an absolute disadvantage in number. As the losses increased, the flying formation of Zhongzhou State began to retreat continuously. Above the sky, the sound of exploding shells and the harsh whistling of the fighter planes flying across the sky were everywhere. In the night sky, the dense light spots were getting denser and denser, and the retreat and pursuit were getting more and more intense. At a certain moment, the formation of the enemy fighter planes directly gathered together, seemingly intentionally or unintentionally. Countless shells were dropped directly. The violent explosions kept ringing in the camp of the Border Control Corps, and it was deafening. Countless elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion fell in the fire of the explosion. Wang Wantian's eyes were red, like a crazy demon. He opened his mouth and roared with all his strength. But the loud sound rushed out of his mouth, but there was no sound. All the sounds were completely suppressed at the moment of the explosion. In an instant, there was only a clear and majestic sound left between heaven and earth. The clear sound was so short and single, but with the momentum of tearing the 9th heaven, it clearly resounded in everyone's ears. The sound of the explosion disappeared, the roar disappeared, and the screams disappeared. Only that clear cry reverberated in the night, lingering in the ears. In the quiet mountain forest, a white light curtain rushed directly to the sky with the clear sound. It was silent like flowing light. It was full of majesty like a god. The thick night, the blood-red sky. In an instant, it was as bright as day. The blazing white light enveloped the whole world. For a moment, there was only a vast and dazzling white left in everyone's sight. The white light was spreading and disappearing. It was like a moment, but also like an eternity. When the white light dissipated, dozens of fighter planes had disappeared in the air without a sound, not even leaving the slightest wreckage. Under the sky, there was only one figure standing at the highest point of the void. A big black spear was held tightly in his hand, pointing to the sky. One man and one spear, in an instant, became the center of the whole world. Everyone was silent, staring blankly at the sky above. That was the most legendary invincible realm expert in the Dark World. It was the world-shaking murderous weapon that left too many legends in the Border Control Corps. After a short silence, the entire Thunderbolt Battalion burst into cheers that went straight to the sky in an instant. The cheers were so fanatical and violent that the huge sound waves kept shaking the entire border. All the cheers turned into 2 words, echoing endlessly in the night sky, like a song that had been sung throughout the ages. Human Emperor. Chapter 230. The attack of the Human Emperor could be said to have changed the color of heaven and earth, turning the night into the day. The surging blazing white light hit the night sky tens of thousands of meters away. Anything tangible was turned into dust under the cover of the white light. More than half of the air forces of the 5 forces that had gathered together disappeared. This kind of power could completely destroy the world. This was the real world-destroying blow. As the number 1 person in the Dark World, even if Wang Tianzong could not exert the power of the ultimate form of the Human Emperor, the destructive power of his attack was also the peak of the combination of a person and a murderous weapon in the Dark World. The number 1 expert in the Dark World, and the number 1 murderous weapon in the Dark World. When both of them were at their peak, Wang Tianzong had the spirit to regard all the invincible realm experts in the world as nothing with a spear in his hand. The white light that covered the night had already disappeared. Amidst the earth-shattering cheers, only that clear cry seemed to still be echoing. All the surviving soldiers of the Border Control Corps roared like crazy. They were absolutely loyal to Dongqing Wudi, but they also admired the legend of Zhongzhou State. For hundreds of years in Zhongzhou State, Every clear sound of the human emperor meant a great victory for Zhongzhou state in some major event. Every time the Wang family of Beihai and the human emperor joined the battlefield, it also meant that Zhongzhou state would go all out in this event and fight for every inch of land. Nothing could make Zhongzhou state compromise. The aftermath of the clear sound of the human emperor had not dissipated. The cheers of the word human emperor had already been heard. The blazing white light dispelled the blood red in the air. It was another clear night over the Nanyan border. The moon was bright, and the stars were sparse. Wang Tianzong stood in the void, bathed in the moonlight falling from the sky. In the loud cheers he slowly said, "Who is here? Come out and fight." The voice was calm and indifferent. The low voice instantly suppressed the cheers on the ground and spread in the whole field. It was majestic, calm and confident. The dark human emperor had turned into the form of an arm guard, covering Wang Tianzong's right arm. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm, and he slowly raised the long sword in his hand. The moment the sword energy rose into the sky, behind a large number of enemies, in the void at almost the same height as Wang Tianzong, a touch of darkness like a raging flame suddenly surged up. The dense night couldn't suppress the darkness. Instead, it was dyed even darker by the black flame. The void was twisting and shaking. The black flame spread like ink, dyeing the void and the dark night. A dangerous aura that was filled with ruthlessness and death swept through the world, vast and mighty. It became more and more obvious in the night sky. "It's almost time." An indistinct voice suddenly rang out in the night sky. It was a very low and deep English accent. Every single word was filled with an almost violent fighting spirit. Far from it. Wang Tianzong stared intently at the black flame that was constantly spreading in the void thousands of meters away, and his tone was cold. "The human emperor has moved. The cannon fodder is almost used up. It's time for our counterattack." The voice continued. It was icy cold and silent, and it seemed to have obliterated all emotions that a human should have. Not to mention the army of Zhongzhou state, even in the enemy camp, anyone who could understand English looked angry. They took off their glory and put on the black clothes they were wearing now. They fought and bathed in blood, but in the end, they got the evaluation of cannon fodder. It was really sad. The black flame was silent, but it was spreading more and more violently. He was telling the truth. On this battlefield, even a half-step invincible realm expert like Dongqing Wudi was a nonentity in his eyes, not to mention ordinary soldiers. Why should he care about the thoughts of nonentities? Wang Tianzong slowly lowered his head. He didn't seem to care about the increasingly fierce black flame in the void at all. He just looked down at the black human emperor that had turned into an arm guard. The black human emperor was now lusterless. But as the black flame in front of it jumped, the black metal surface of the human emperor seemed to have a reaction and kept rippling. Wang Tianzong stroked the arm guard, expressionless. There were few records about murderous weapons in the dark world. The 13 murderous weapons usually appeared at the most critical moment, so some secrets that were not secrets were not widely spread. Especially about the origin of the murderous weapons. Only a few people in the dark world knew that the 13 murderous weapons came from the same source. They came from the same piece of metal, but they were different in size and color. This kind of rare treasure originally came from a superpower overseas. After its decline hundreds of years ago, it was robbed and finally divided into 13 parts. 19 years ago, with the destruction of the Li family's murderous weapon Infinite Sky, the 12 murderous weapons left today were all that was left of that piece of metal. For countless years, all the superpowers and even countries had been searching for this mysterious metal intentionally or unintentionally. But for hundreds of years, there was only one such piece of metal. Since it was divided, no new murderous weapons had appeared. The murderous weapons were made into guns, but they didn't need bullets. The energy they emitted was entirely the energy they absorbed. In short, murderous weapons needed to store energy, which was their biggest weakness. The last time the human emperor made a clear sound was more than a decade ago. The accumulated energy of more than a decade was vented with the firing of the human emperor tonight. As for when it could be used again, whether it would be a month or two, a year or two, it was the top secret of the Wang family of Beihai. But at least in this battle, The human emperor that had already fired couldn't play a role for the time being. However, the human emperor destroyed dozens of fighter jets in one fell swoop with the energy accumulated by the human emperor over the years. Such a result was not a disgrace to the reputation of the human emperor. And the most important thing was that those famous flying teams were obviously the bait left by the 5 superpowers for the human emperor. If the human emperor didn't move, the invincible realm experts hidden in the dark wouldn't come out to court death. No one knew how long this war would last. So Wang Tianzong simply used the human emperor to swallow the bait. Time was limited, so he had to finish the battle quickly. The light in Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became sharp. He ranked first on the divine list, and should be invincible in the world. Even without the human emperor, he still had a sword. With a sword in hand he was fearless. Even without the human emperor, you are no match for me. Arceus, do you really think a murderous weapon that hasn't been storing energy for a long time can do anything to me? Wang Tianzong slowly raised his head. Staring at the black flame in the void, his tone became colder and colder. From the first time he saw the black flame, he had already determined who the invincible realm expert, who came to the border this time, was. He didn't belong to any invincible realm expert from the 5 superpowers, but he was inextricably linked to Knights Templars. To be precise, he was one of the masters of Knights Templars. The second on the world divine list. Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Saint Arceus. I want to have a try. The deep voice, like a murmur, echoed in the sky. In the void, the black flame suddenly rose to the limit. The murderous weapon had been fully activated. The black flame was like a tide, and it suddenly set off a black wave as high as the sky. Wang Tianzong said no more, and raised the long sword horizontally. This was a simple and old long sword that didn't look special. But as the blade was unsheathed inch by inch, the long sword suddenly burst out with unparalleled brilliance. This was a famous sword that had been around for less than 200 years. It was a famous sword that was made up of several broken swords from the Wang family of Beihai. The sword energy was shocking. The sword is called Listen to the Sea. There was a surge under Listen to the Sea. Boom! The black flame that dyed the whole sky suddenly vibrated. The moment the black flame wave twisted, in the void ahead, a tall and majestic figure suddenly appeared in the void. A black spear that was more than 1 meter long and shaped like a shotgun was held in his hand. He pointed the muzzle at Wang Tianzong, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. There was a sudden explosion in the night sky. It sounded like a scream, but also like a sigh. This was the murderous weapon that had made the Dark Knights suffer heavy losses in Northern Europe 5 years ago. It was also the murderous weapon that helped Knights Templars successfully withstand the great pressure of the Dark Knights. It was also the murderous weapon that belonged to Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Arceus. Chant of Death. The black flame surged, and the starlight and moonlight were completely covered by the black flame. The black light almost enveloped all the space around Wang Tianzong in an instant. The moment Listen to the Sea was about to be unsheathed. On the east and west sides of the battlefield, there was a long roar that shook the night sky almost at the same time. One east and one west. It was an old roar filled with endless battle intent. The other voice was relatively young, full of tiredness and helplessness. The long roar sounded one after another, but the 2 strong lights arrived at the moment when Listen to the Sea was unsheathed. The sword energy was boiling in the air, and the whole world was trembling. The infinite sword light surged in the east and the west, but the sword energy was incredibly from the same source. It was a different momentum, but it was almost the same sword chi and sword intent. The 2 sword energy converged in the air in an instant. The extremely powerful sword intent merged incredibly in an instant, and the power increased exponentially. In the black flame all over the sky, the 2 sword energy converged together like a rainbow, and instantly dispersed the flame all over the sky. Arceus's pupils suddenly contracted. In an instant, all the scenes in front of him disappeared completely, and there were only 2 sword lights left in the whole world. A blood-colored long sword flew in the air. A blood-colored flag whistled across the sky. Completely different weapons. It was the same sword intent. The same unique skill. 20-second blade, break of the sky. A flag and a sword flew from different directions and crossed a distance of thousands of meters. Originally, It was not a joint sword, but when they merged together, it broke out in incredible power. The bright edge smashed the black flame all over the sky in the blink of an eye. The edge ran through the world, and the void was torn and broken inch by inch in the powerful sword light. The sword light spread. The black flame was broken. The peerless edge swallowed Arceus in an instant. It swallowed the chant of death in his hand. Li Hongha. There was a roar of extreme pain in the darkness. Wrapped by the bright sword light, Arceus's body instantly retreated. A blood-colored star flag directly stabbed into Arceus's abdomen. The flag fluttered and flew in the wind. Suddenly, two figures appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong calmly withdrew the long sword and did not look at Arceus. He just silently looked at the old man in front of him, with a complicated look in his eyes. Lin Fengting, who rushed to Zhongzhou State from Switzerland, also had a change in his eyes. The old man standing in the front no longer had the star flag in his hand. He stood in the void with his back to Lin Fengting and Wang Tianzong, and his whole body was surging with a kind of fighting intent and coldness that could almost suppress heaven and earth. That kind of crazy and fierce momentum suppressed Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting in the peak state. He was indomitable and unrestrained. And he could no longer restrain himself. He really could not restrain himself. Lin Fengting's eyes suddenly turned red. His body trembled, and he took a deep breath. Together with Wang Tianzong, he bowed deeply to the old man in front of him and said respectfully, "Senior Li." Li Hongha, who had been fighting on 13 battlefields in a day, was covered with blood. Instead of weakening, his aura was getting stronger and stronger. He slowly turned around, looked at Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting who were bowing in front of him, and then looked at Arceus who had retreated to the distance. After a while he nodded and whispered, "He is wearing the holy garment of the Vatican, so he is not badly hurt. If we want to keep him and the chant of death, it is bound to be a long fight. It won't waste much time." Wang Tianzong straightened up and said. Lin Fengting did not speak. Arceus was the second on the divine list. Although he was seriously injured now, it was not fatal. It was not difficult to defeat him, but it was not easy to kill him even if the three of them joined forces. If Arceus wanted to run away, it would definitely be a problem. It won't waste much time? Do you still have time? Huading has been in chaos for a long time. Your people in East Island will also be wiped out. In the distance, Arceus said with a cold smile, his face pale. The holy garment of the Vatican on him, which was similar to a robe, was completely broken, but his voice was still full of energy. Li Hongha narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly said, "You go back to Huating. I'll deal with him." Senior Li, Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting said at the same time. "Don't say more. Hurry up. My current state." Hey. His voice was very low, and there was unspeakable misery in his self-mockery. "It's too late," Arceus whispered, and his figure disappeared into the void again. His voice came from all directions. "So what if you go back to Huating now? Don't you want the 100,000 troops of the Blood Battalion? I lost, but there are still more than 200 experts from the 5 superpowers here. What do you have on the border of Zhongzhou State? As long as you dare to leave, the Blood Battalion will definitely disappear. You're bound to lose, ha 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 ha." Swish. Li Hongha, whose aura was extremely strong, did not hesitate at all. He directly rushed toward the place where Arceus disappeared. He did not look back, but just calmly and indifferently ordered, "You go back to Huating. I'm here." After many years, they met again. In the face of Wang Tianzong, he did not talk about grievances. In the face of Lin Fengting, he did not talk about the inheritance. At this moment, Li Hongha seemed to go back to decades ago. He was the war god of Zhongzhou State. On the battlefield, there was only Zhongzhou State in his heart. "You. Haha, not enough. Who else? Who else?" In Arceus's presumptuous laughter, the enemy on the ground and the battle team in the air gathered together. The experts of the Thundershocking Realm and Fire-Flaming Realm from the 5 superpowers all appeared in the enemy's camp, and their killing intent kept spreading. "Me too. Zhou Qiang from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. Qing Yi from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family." Lu He from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. One voice after another suddenly sounded in the depths of the forest, shaking in the night sky like thunder. Dozens of figures appeared in the forest, men and women, old and young. Everyone was dressed in ragged coarse clothes. No one wore a military uniform, no one carried a military rank, and no one mentioned Zhongzhou state. They mentioned Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun and the Li family. To your highness. To the Li family. The hoarse roar sounded in the night sky in unison. To Li Honghe. These elites of the Li family, who had lingered on the border for many years, were finally willing to fight for the Li family. Only for the Li family. After all, the knot in their hearts had not been untied, and probably could not be untied. In the late night of the 5th day, the remaining Li family, with their glory that had long fallen into the dust, directly confronted the 5 dark forces in their heyday. How lonely the dark world without the Li family would be. Chapter 231. There was no sword in Li Honghe's hand, but as he moved, there were obscure but sharp sword intent everywhere in the deep night. The ubiquitous sword intent followed him like a shadow. As he charged, it turned into a dazzling sword light. A large area of the void was torn apart by the sword light, but Arceus and Li Honghe had completely disappeared. The roars echoed in the border one after another, calm and tragic. The elites of the Li family, who had been stationed on the border for nearly 2 decades, kept rushing out of the jungle. Fighting. Only fighting. Arceus showed up. The chant of death fired. The 5 combat teams in the air appeared again. The bright light and shadow on the ground shone and twisted to the limit, and finally expanded to the night sky. The sound of vibration was endless. The whole battlefield had completely disappeared from sight, leaving only the light. Brilliant, tragic light. Lin Fengting wanted to make a move several times, but he was held tightly by Wang Tianzong. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, who could be said to be the best in both boldness and force, was in a trance, with unconcealable confusion and sadness in his eyes. The flickering light and shadow of the battlefield below were clearly reflected in his pupils. He held Lin Fengting's body and said calmly, "This is the war of the Li family. Is this the reason why you stand by?" Lin Fengting shook off Wang Tianzong's hand fiercely and said with a sneer. The patriarch of the Lin clan, who usually looked so free and unrestrained that he had nothing to do with the world, had indifferent eyes. When his eyes flashed, they were full of soul-stirring sharpness and sword intent. "I have more important things to do." Wang Tianzong's trance finally became calm. He took a deep look at the direction where Li Honghe left and continued. "Fengting, since you are here, how about going to Huating with me?" Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes slightly. Before he could speak, Wang Tianzong said again, "Don't worry, Senior Li is fine at least for now. He destroyed his own foundation. In such a state, not to mention Arceus, even I am no match for him. I have seen this kind of thing with my own eyes, so I have the right to speak. So we have won the border battle." Lin Fengting's expression, which was about to explode, moved and gradually became gloomy. He looked in the direction where Li Honghe disappeared in silence, and did not speak for a long time. Li Honghe's current state was so powerful that it was almost weird. Lin Fengting had never seen such a state before, but he had heard of it. Judging from Li Honghe's current age, even if he could still exert the strength of the invincible realm, his combat capability should have declined to the lowest point. But his performance today showed that his combat capability not only did not decline, but also vaguely exceeded the peak state. There was only one explanation for this phenomenon. In martial arts, this was called self-destruction of the foundation, or perhaps, the final radiance of the setting sun. What did it mean to forcefully stimulate every bone and muscle in one's body when one's body was at its weakest, allowing one to recover and even surpass one's peak state? The so-called peak combat capability could only be possessed in the golden years when a person's body was at its strongest. Li Honghe's body had been old for a long time, but at this time, he was bearing the power that could only be born when his body was in its best state. Li Honghe's every move was incredibly powerful, but his ending had long been doomed. There were only 2 outcomes. If the human body was compared to a jar, then the power was the flame in the jar. The jar itself would become stronger and stronger, and the internal flame would become more and more blazing, always maintaining a balance. As time went by, the jar would gradually decay, and the internal flame would become weaker and weaker. This was an irresistible law of nature. But what Li Honghe was doing now was equivalent to using a worn-out jar to hold the hottest flame. The first outcome was naturally that the jar was completely destroyed by the flame. The second outcome was not much better. In the fierce battle, Li Honghe would temporarily vent part of the flame in the jar, but his body, which had long been out of balance, could no longer bear the excessive power. In the worn-out jar, the flame would burn more and more fiercely over time. The jar might barely be able to contain the flame, but the imbalance was already destined. The flame would constantly erode the decayed jar, and eventually, the jar would be completely burned to ashes. This process was destined to be painful and tortuous, but the outcome could not be reversed. In this battle, if Li Honghe did not die, his body would become weaker and weaker, but his combat capability would become stronger and stronger, until the balance between his strength and his body was completely broken. At that time, he would turn into ashes without anyone's help. This period of time might last for a few months, or even a few years. Wang Tianzong had seen this extremely terrible state with his own eyes. More than 20 years ago, before Wang Tianzong entered the Invincible Realm, the Heroes Club, an American superpower, joined forces with Fantasy World and the Polar Ground Alliance to invade Zhongzhou State. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, who was also Wang Tianzong's father, once joined forces with Li Honghe to attack. In that battle, the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, faced with the siege of 3 Invincible Realm experts, had no choice but to make such a cruel and decisive choice. After the battle, 2 Invincible Realm experts died, and 1 escaped with serious injuries. Wang Tianzong's father struggled to return to the Wang family of Beihai. His body was getting weaker and weaker under the surging power, but the longer it dragged on, the stronger his combat capability became. During that time, the old patriarch was seriously injured, and Wang Tianzong did not enter the Invincible Realm. It could be said that it was the weakest period of the Wang family of Beihai, but no one in the Dark World dared to provoke them. The old patriarch held on for a few years, until Wang Tianzong successfully entered the Invincible Realm, and then he gave up fighting and died peacefully. Senior Li needs to fight now, Wang Tianzong said calmly. He seemed to think of something, and a trace of gloom flashed in his eyes for a moment, and then it became deep again. An armed helicopter roared and hovered in the air, getting closer and closer. Fengting, how about going to Huiting together? The situation is precarious. After this, I think we should have a good talk. Wang Tianzong looked at the helicopter in the distance and suddenly said, "We can talk now. We still have time to go from here to Huiting." Lin Fengting took a deep breath, and his whole body suddenly rushed into the sky, entering the cabin with Wang Tianzong one after the other. The helicopter circled and rushed to Huiting at the fastest speed. Someone committed treason. Most of the rotor's roar was blocked by the cabin. Wang Tianzong silently looked at the night outside the window and suddenly said. Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows and looked at Wang Tianzong, but he did not speak. Wang Tianzong seemed to have a headache. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. I found it not long ago. For this war, the Border Control Corps is actually well prepared. Although there is no power to fight against murderous weapons and invincible realm experts here, the firepower is still very sufficient. But a few hours ago, someone secretly changed the password of the arsenal of the Border Control Corps, and at the same time, sent dozens of completely different wrong instructions to the nearby Air Force base, which also led to the border battle just now. Our air power is extremely weak, and the air defense power of the Blood Battalion was changed because the password was changed. It can't be launched in a short time, so I had to use the Human Emperor. Otherwise, the attack of the Human Emperor should have directly fallen on Arsis. The other party is really well prepared this time. Lin Fengting listened quietly. When Wang Tianzong finished, he nodded and said, Do you have any suspects? No. Wang Tianzong shook his head with a wry smile. It's under secret investigation. At present, few people know about it, including President Li Huaqi Baitsong, the Minister of the Army Headquarters, Yi Dongxing Mi and Dongqing Wudi. This is very important, but it's not the right time to make it public. Let's talk about it after Changdao is over. Lin Fengting gave a cold "oh" and said calmly, "You know, I don't care about these things. The Lin clan is just a passerby to Zhongzhou state. We only care about what we should care about." Wang Tianzong listened with a smile, took a meaningful look at Lin Fengting and said softly, "If you were really so free and easy, you wouldn't have shown up here today. Don't get me wrong." Lin Fengting shook his head and said, "I'm here today just to try to be a lobbyist, and at the same time I want to figure out something." Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Lin Fengting. After a long time he nodded and said, "Go ahead." The Li family. Lin Fengting's eyes were solemn and sharp. He stared straight at Wang Tianzong in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What on earth happened to the Li family that year? Don't say treason." Before Wang Tianzong opened his mouth, he waved his hand and said, "Treason is the result. What's the cause?" Wang Tianzong was silent. Under Lin Fengting's increasingly sharp eyes, after a long time, he said blandly, "Seeking change." "Seeking change?" Lin Fengting frowned. "The dark world is turbulent. Every superpower has its own pursuit, and it must make some adjustments because of its own pursuit or because of perceived problems. The Li family died on the road of seeking change. They chose the wrong time in the game, and finally exited in disgrace." Wang Tianzong said slowly, "The reason why the Wang family of Beihai didn't take action at that time was that it was indeed more in line with the interests of the Wang family of Beihai. Secondly, it was because it was the Li family's own business." He stared at Lin Fengting's eyes seriously and repeated in a serious tone, "It was the Li family's own business. What on earth do you know?" Lin Fengting looked more and more solemn. "I don't know. Even if I know, I'm not sure." Wang Tianzong shook his head, avoided Lin Fengting's eyes, and said blandly, "The Wang family of Beihai also needs to seek change. We will also take this road. The Li family took this road earlier. In fact, if the Wang family of Beihai took the lead, the status quo could be maintained if it succeeded. But if it failed, do you really think the Li family would help?" He paused and said coldly, "Why?" Lin Fengting closed his eyes, feeling more and more tired. What is right and wrong in this world? What is grievance? What is friendship? Wang Tianzong sighed softly and looked at the tired Lin Fengting. "Fengting, don't ask about this. It can't be explained clearly. I don't need to ask about this." The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth twitched, and he said slowly, "But let's put Li Tianlan's matter aside." Wang Tianzong's expression froze, and he said calmly, "Put it aside? Do you know the origin of the master of Samsara Palace?" Lin Fengting asked softly, physically and mentally exhausted. "Do you know?" Wang Tianzong asked in reply. "She mastered the 24 moves of Sword of the Li family. We all guessed that she was the backup left by Senior Li. I'll investigate it again, and I believe you're also investigating it. This person didn't appear at all in our time, as if she didn't exist at all. I think it's not that she didn't exist, but that we were investigating in the wrong direction. If she really has nothing to do with Senior Li and knows the 24 moves of sword, then where do you think she came from?" Lin Fengting asked. Wang Tianzong's body shook violently, and he suddenly looked up at Lin Fengting in front of him. He said word by word, "You mean, the master of Samsara Palace is from your Lin clan?" "I'm not sure." Lin Fengting shook his head bitterly. Over the years, many people couldn't stand the boredom of the Lin clan. They took the money and went sightseeing. Several elders in the clan have been gone for 50 or 60 years, and haven't come back. I don't even know if they are still alive. There are too many people like this in the Lin clan. The master of Samsara Palace is probably a junior of these people. She's my younger sister or elder sister. I can tell you the truth. I'm very uncomfortable with the destruction of the Li family. If Tianlan didn't show up, I would have decided to let Yuxian revive Zhuanyuantai. I have this idea, and the Lin clansmen wandering outside may have the same idea. The master of Samsara Palace found Tianlan, which is enough to prove the problem. I know your character. You won't let go of Tianlan. If something happens to Tianlan, the master of Samsara Palace takes action and asks for help from the Lin clan. What do you think the position of the Lin clan will be? You won't care about the Li family, but won't you consider the attitude of the Lin clan? Wang Tianzong was silent. The Lin clan didn't show its strength, but its absolute strength was enough to make anyone feel like facing a formidable enemy. Is this a threat? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while, and asked lightly. It's a piece of advice. Lin Fengting said calmly. We have supported each other for hundreds of years. Do you really want to fight against each other? Wang Tianzong nodded slowly and said softly. If you told me these words a few months ago, or even a month ago, maybe I would have changed my mind. What about now? Lin Fengting's face changed. It's too late now. Wang Tianzong said coldly. It's too late. Lin Fengting sat up straight calmly and said calmly. What do you mean? When you went to Mount Dibbing last time, didn't you ask me where Hongwei went? Wang Tianzong said softly. It's that guy. Lin Fengting's expression softened a little. He said with a chuckle. Why? You said it was a secret at that time. Can you tell me now? Jiang Hongwei, the only official disciple of Wang Tianzong, was also the young man that Lin Fengting once tried to lure back to the Lin clan. The Jiang family of Beihai was one of the most important parts of the Wang family of Beihai, and Jiang Hongwei was the only successor of the Jiang family. At that time, the patriarch of the Jiang family hesitated between the Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai for a long time, and finally let Jiang Hongwei be Wang Tianzong's disciple. However, for many years, there was no news of Jiang Hongwei in the Wang family of Beihai. Jiang Hongwei should be 33 years old this year. A 33-year-old with double thunder veins. He got the inheritance of Sword Emperor. How terrifying he was now. All these years he has been in North America, in charge of a secret research institute. Wang Tianzong said calmly, you should have heard of that research institute. One of the drugs he is researching is called Surge. A few months ago, Samsara traded Surge through a special channel. It should have been taken by Li Tianlan. Is that the research institute of the Wang family of Beihai? Lin Fengting frowned, took a deep breath and said. And then? And then? Wang Tianzong smiled and said, about half a month ago, Sheng Xiao taught Li Tianlan a style of Against the Way of Heaven. As for Li Tianlan, according to my secret investigation, he is indeed extraordinary. He broke through the fire-flaming realm and went straight to the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 17. Before Wang Tianzong finished speaking, Lin Fengting's face had changed. Surge could improve a person's combat capability by one realm. Against the Way of Heaven was the same. It was impossible for the two to have nothing to do with each other. And Li Tianlan had entered the thunder-shocking realm before. It was all a conspiracy. A conspiracy to kill people in an invisible way. You. Lin Fengting stood up slowly with a cold expression. I can promise you, Wang Tianzong said blandly. If Li Tianlan doesn't die this time, I won't touch him in a few years, provided that he doesn't die. Now it's too late. The research institute in North America has been destroyed. Hongwei should have arrived in East Island now. Although the Wang family of Beihai has not had a second invincible realm expert, it already has the combat capability of a second invincible realm expert. Now it's too late. Lin Fengting suddenly turned around and looked out of the window. It was dark outside the window. It was the darkest time before dawn again. Time passed slowly. In the deepening night, the morning came gradually. Chapter 232. They were retreating. They were fleeing. The distance between retreating and advancing was almost constant. The distance of hundreds of meters had been maintained, neither too far nor too close, neither too far nor too close. In front of them was still a boundless forest. Under the dim light of the setting sun, the dense mottled shadows of the trees scattered on the ground, flickering. But behind them was already a stretch of yellow sand. Trees of different sizes and thicknesses had been completely decomposed into pieces that were hard to be seen by the naked eye. The grass had completely disappeared, the soil had lost its vitality, and the water had completely evaporated. The yellow sand on the ground was scattered around, and the gravel rolled in the wind, reflecting the light that was more dazzling than the sun. Wisps of flames gathered in the fine sand. The flame gradually turned from orange to transparent. When the flame was about to disappear completely, wisps of blue lightning began to breed in the flame. Fire and lightning intertwined and spread. As a result, more and more trees began to fall and shatter. The lush green land turned into yellow sand under the extremely high temperature. It was like a barren desert. Dozens of people ran wildly in the forest without looking back. They had reached the center of the No. 6 Theater of Operations. About 3 kilometers ahead, they could reach the headquarters of the No. 6 Theater of Operations. The No. 6 Theater of Operations was divided by the Special Warfare System of East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto, the only expert of the Invincible Realm in East Island, personally divided the battlefield with a radius of 100 miles into 8 theaters of operations. The No. 6 Theater of Operations referred to the forest with a radius of about 30 kilometers. In terms of location, it was already at the end of the battlefield. Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Training School, Liuhua Palace and the Divine Wind Force both had elites stationed in the No. 6 Theater of Operations. It was not a very important theater of operations, but since 2 days ago, it had been regarded as the beast-trapped theater of operations. They ran and chased. On the night of the 4th day, Li Tianlan entered the No. 6 Theater of Operations. But who could have thought that this trapped beast, which many people thought had nowhere to go, would be so crazy in 2 days and 2 nights? Qingshan is approaching the headquarters. Feiyu is approaching the headquarters. Request backup. The fleeing team kept moving forward, and the urgent call for help kept reaching the headquarters a few kilometers away. How's the situation? The rustling sound of the walkie-talkie sounded, and a depressed and cold voice came from the walkie-talkie. We've suffered heavy losses. Requesting backup. Qingshan's voice passed over without any pause. He came from Wuji Palace, the most powerful martial arts force in East Island, and his strength was close to the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. In the entire special warfare system of East Island, he could be said to be an important master, who could not be underestimated. But at this moment, this tall swordsman from Limitless Palace was in an extremely sorry state. Blood flowed from all over his body. His face was completely covered in blood. His eyes, which were dyed red by blood, flickered continuously. His eyes were full of fear and despair. We'll be right there, the final battle. From the walkie-talkie, the suppressed voice sounded again, but it sounded extremely dry. Qingshan laughed bitterly, but he didn't dare to turn around. He could only brace himself and roar. Target the command center. Full speed ahead. His voice was very loud, but it lacked any confidence. The headquarters was close at hand, but Qingshan didn't feel safe at all. The commander-in-chief of the No. 6 Theater of Operations was codenamed Yuekong, the first protector of Wuji Palace, a real superior of the half-step invincible realm. Qingshan himself was an expert from Wuji Palace, so he had a deep understanding of the strength of the first protector. He was completely sure that Yuekong's combat capability was above that of Bai Yi, the right advisor of Wuji Palace. But a superior of the half-step invincible realm was right in front of him, and Qingshan was getting more and more frightened. In a panic, he hurriedly looked back. The flame with lightning was burning silently, and a large area of the forest was swallowed by the flame and turned into a desert. The setting sun, the yellow sand, the bloody clothes, the silver spear. The wind blew and the clouds moved. It was a vivid and weird picture. Qingshan's scalp went numb, and he felt weak all over for a moment. He was breaking through. He was transforming. One picture after another flashed and disappeared in Li Tianlan's mind. Day and night. The memories that had been suppressed for many years kept emerging in his mind. His willpower broke through the shackles. Many people and many things kept spinning in his mind. Li Tianlan's expression was numb and muddle-headed, but he exuded an indescribable sharpness and insolence. As the young master of the Li family, as my grandson, Tianlan, do you regret it? Dongqing Huangtu. Tianlan, I'm sorry. Maybe I was really wrong. If it shouldn't be, then forget it. You are the heavenly son, but you should not only be the heavenly son of the Li family. Your martial arts should not be limited to the sword. The ultimate form of the human emperor. He had a splitting headache. Countless memories came one after another. He didn't want to recall them, but all kinds of memories kept hitting his mind, painful, excited, and confused. His willpower, which was already close to the peak, was sublimated after breaking through the final shackles. The power of his sword intent skyrocketed under the pure and invincible willpower. Li Tianlan broke through again, broke through the ice-condensing realm, and was infinitely close to the fire-flaming realm. The surge potion stimulated his nerves all the time. After a big realm leap, Li Tianlan's combat capability had stabilized at the half-step thunder-shocking realm. But in his chaotic memories, there was always a scene that lingered in his mind. It was a picture, a sentence. You have to remember, the real invincible thing is not unique skills or realms. For the Li family, the invincible thing is the sword intent, and only the sword intent. Ah! His thoughts were tumbling, and the endless pain in his head spread all over his body. Li Tianlan roared fiercely, and the figure instantly sped up. The distance of hundreds of meters was shortened at a high speed. Qing Shan and Fei Yu were scared out of their wits. They sprinted with all their strength, even ignoring the lives of their subordinates. The fire behind them instantly filled the mountain forest. But the fierce sword intent tore the air faster than the fire. It was the sword intent condensed to the extreme, cold, pure, and could break everything. Boom! The sword intent whistled and scattered. More than a dozen elites were torn into powder on the spot by the fierce and powerful sword intent. The silver edge did not stop at all. It passed through the blood rain, and stopped directly in front of Qing Shan and Fei Yu. Qing Shan and Fei Yu, who were sprinting at full speed, stopped abruptly. Looking at Li Tianlan in front of them, their pupils contracted. "We're almost there. I'll send you on your way," Li Tianlan said blandly. The severe pain in his head completely woke him up from his muddle-headed state. For 2 days and 2 nights, from being chased to being chased, the scenes replayed in his mind. While his memory became clear, Li Tianlan seemed to feel that some memories were leaving him. Those were the scenes he once recalled, and now they were gradually becoming blurred. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. The old scenes were disappearing, and new ones were appearing. The ultimate form of the human emperor. Is that so? Li Tianlan whispered to himself, and his arms suddenly shook. Absolute power was completely poured into the silver spear in his hand. Under the gradually gloomy light, the silver spear, which was more than 2 meters long, seemed to suddenly light up. The spear body of the human emperor shook violently. The silver spear head buzzed, and the blades on both sides of the spear head suddenly stretched. After the breakthrough, the power that was infinitely close to the thunder-shocking realm completely shook the mechanism of the human emperor. 2 red spear blades suddenly stretched out. It was a pair of red, sparkling, and translucent spear blades. Countless complex golden patterns were densely intertwined on the surface of the spear, looking gorgeous and mysterious. At this moment, the whole shape of the human emperor completely changed because of the 2 huge spear blades. From the silver spear, it became a halberd. Sky halberd. This was the ultimate form of the human emperor. In a trance, another picture emerged in his mind. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but his heart was slightly turbulent. In his memory, it was still in the camp on the border, but he saw a monk he shouldn't have seen. Great Master Wuwei. It turned out that he had seen this metaphysics grandmaster before, a long time ago. In the picture, Great Master Wuwei seemed to be saying something, but in a trance, Li Tianlan finally heard only 4 words. Great Master Wuwei. The memory was still surging. He was recalling. Chapter 233. Halberd, an ancient powerful weapon, was shaped like a long spear. The 2 crescent-shaped spear blades stretched out on both sides of the spear tip, which could be used to stab and chop. It was a cold weapon with the highest requirements for the user. Throughout history, all the people who were good at using sky halberd were fierce generals who dominated an era. The leader of all weapons, the emperor of all weapons. The silver halberd glowed in the deep night. The spearhead of the human emperor was a bit broken, but the newly stretched spear blade was shining with dazzling brilliance. It was a kind of strange and indescribable scarlet, like solidified blood, crystal clear. Complicated golden lines wrapped around the red spear blade. The gold and red intertwined. Against the silver, the whole sky halberd seemed to be alive. Li Tianlan's eyes were unprecedentedly clear. He took a step forward and raised the sky halberd in his hand. In an instant, the mountain was shrouded in the thick night. The sky halberd and him became one, and suddenly emitted a kind of earth-shattering momentum. The memories that poured into his mind like a tide began to stop. They were breaking and dissipating. From the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak of the ice-condensing realm. And now he was in the half-step fire-flaming realm. His realm had crossed 2 small steps in 2 days, but his willpower had improved more than several times. If the most important thing in the early stage of martial arts was strength, the most important thing in the later stage was willpower. In the same realm, the absolutely focused willpower could exert incredible lethality. Willpower was concentration. In other words, concentration. If Li Tianlan's strength and willpower were quantified, his willpower was 5 and his strength was 10. Then he could exert the combat capability of 5 at most. He might be focused enough, but obviously not to the extent that he could exert all his strength. Now his willpower had doubled, and his lethality had also doubled. Li Tianlan hadn't recovered to the thunder-shocking realm yet, but he vaguely felt that he was already standing at the peak of his life. The memory he got back was forgotten, but the true self that he had lost had completely returned. So he could turn the tables in 2 days and almost defeat the No. 6 theater of operations in East Island with his own strength. Until this moment, Li Tianlan felt a feeling that he could be unrivaled and look down on everyone. During the duration of the surge drug, there weren't many people in East Island who could scare him. Vaguely, Li Tianlan seemed to see a brand new path. The Great Way was extremely broad and primitive, but it went straight to the sky, constantly impacting his existing concepts. His instinct kept reminding him that this was the most suitable martial arts for him. But among the gradually fading images in his mind, there was always an image that kept reverberating in his mind like a curse. He was Great Master Wu Wei. It was his 4 words. It was a great victory. Was it really worth it to lose and gain in the midst of destruction? Li Tianlan hesitated as he asked himself, "Benefactor, do you believe in destiny? Trust in karma?" Another picture became clear in his heart. It was the first thing Great Master Wu Wei said to him when he met him in the Dongqing clan a few months ago. Destiny? Li Tianlan clenched the human emperor's halberd in his hand and laughed softly. His eyes became clear in his smile, and the clear or unclear memories in his heart began to dissipate rapidly, blurring, retreating. There aren't many of you left. He looked at Qing Shan and Fei Yu in front of him and finally said softly, "After killing you, I should return to the team. You'd better stay." Silently, a low and cold voice rang out behind Li Tianlan. This voice seemed calm, but there was an extremely twisted rage in every single one of his words. Li Tianlan turned around. A middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s quietly appeared in the forest. He stood in the void, but his powerful momentum had already soared into the sky, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. This was a middle-aged man who looked very imposing. Like most people in East Island, he was very short, but he looked extremely well-proportioned. His tone was angry, but his expression was extremely calm. It was undisguised cruelty and indifference, which was close to inhumanity. The most important thing was that he was dressed in white. The white clothes shone with a soft luster in the dim jungle. They looked like robes, large and simple, but when the clothes fluttered occasionally, there was a metallic light flashing. Li Tianlan subconsciously looked at the silver clothes he was wearing. His silver clothes were completely torn, but the seemingly soft silver robe didn't turn into strands of cloth. Instead, it broke into pieces like armor. Li Tianlan remembered that the original appearance of this silver robe seemed to be very similar to the white robe the man was wearing. "That's my brother's battle suit. It's integrated with soft alloy. I gave it to him." The middle-aged man seemed to know what Li Tianlan was thinking and said in a cold voice. Li Tianlan said, "Oh." He thought for a while and said, "This suit is good, but your brother can't take a beating." He took this suit from an expert of the thunder-shocking realm, and he didn't mean to humiliate him. That man was indeed too weak, and his head was pierced by a spear. He died miserably. "You must pay the price." The eyes of the man in white gradually straightened, and his voice became colder and colder. He was Yuekong, the first guardian of Wuji Palace, an expert of the half-step invincible realm, and also the commander-in-chief of the No. 6 Theater of Operations. Yuekong was very confident about besieging Li Tianlan at the beginning. The No. 6 Theater of Operations was close to the edge of the battlefield, and it was also responsible for guarding against the 5 dark superpowers nearby. Although the people stationed here were not the strongest in each theater of operations, they could be said to be one of the strongest. There were 11 experts of the Thunder-Shocking realm, more than 100 experts of the Fire-Flaming realm, and hundreds of special warfare elites of the Ice-Condensing realm and below. With such a lineup, there was no possibility of failure to besiege a young man. But things changed dramatically from the very beginning. The unexpected death of Icebird and Black Shield directly shocked the entire No. 6 Theater of Operations. Especially Icebird, who was not only an expert at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking realm, but also the exclusive property of Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace. How could Yuekong not be furious with such a loss? After getting the news, he didn't think carefully at all. In a rage, he directly sent a team of experts of the Thunder-Shocking realm to hunt Li Tianlan down again. But Li Tianlan's combat strength inexplicably soared to an unimaginable level. Obviously, he had only broken through 2 small realms, but the pressure he brought to others had multiplied. As expected, the second encirclement and suppression team was completely annihilated. The No. 6 Theater of Operations was on the verge of losing control in an instant. At this point, Yuekong should have actively reported to the headquarters where Shinichi Miyamoto was, but he gave up the idea after thinking about it. He gritted his teeth and continued to send elites to encircle and suppress Li Tianlan. 3 waves of pursuing teams were killed by Li Tianlan. 8 of the 11 experts of the Thunder-Shocking realm died. Now in the No. 6 Theater of Operations, there were only 3 experts of the Thunder-Shocking realm: Yuekong, Qingshan, and Feiyu. There were nearly 1,000 elites in the No. 6 Theater of Operations, but less than 1/10 of them survived. Shinichi Miyamoto and others were still paying close attention to the final battle in the front, but they still didn't know what happened in the No. 6 Theater of Operations. Now Yuekong had already reached a dead end. The No. 6 Theater of Operations suffered such a heavy loss, but he kept it a secret, which was definitely a felony. But now he still had a chance to turn the tables. Li Tianlan had been seriously injured in many battles. Needless to say, he was valuable. As long as he could capture him, it was acceptable even if he had to pay the price of the entire No. 6 Theater of Operations. As long as he could capture Li Tianlan, Yuekong's eyes were cold. This battle was related to his future, and even his life. He had no way out. As long as Li Tianlan fell into his hands, the matter of the No. 6 Theater of Operations could be settled. Yuekong took a deep breath and was about to speak. Li Tianlan took the initiative to speak. "Are all your people here?" His voice was soft, but with indescribable concentration and seriousness. Yuekong was stunned for a moment. Dense footsteps began to sound from all directions. That was all the remaining elites in the No. 6 Theater of Operations. They were all mobilized by Yuekong at once. In order to capture Li Tianlan and reverse his passive situation, he was desperate. The corner of Yuekong's mouth moved, but Li Tianlan interrupted him again. "Then let's go." He took a light step forward. But with one step, he rushed up to the sky. The setting sun on the horizon had completely set. The moment darkness covered Changdao, a silver light rose up in the forest. The bright moon was in the sky. The silver light spread like crazy, shaking the void sky. A large amount of fire waves appeared without any warning, like a vast sea of fire, covering everything. Li Tianlan was high in the sky, walking on the waves. The silver moon suddenly turned into a blazing sun. The light was boundless. This was Li Tianlan now. He found his true self. Yuekong suddenly let out an extremely angry roar. He rushed up, passed through the sea of fire, and went straight to Li Tianlan. At the same time, in 2 different directions of the No. 6 Theater of Operations, the moment Yuekong's roar spread through the forest, a man in black who had been lingering in the No. 6 Theater of Operations moved and rushed over. In another direction, a young man who seemed to be searching for something also stood up and stared at the battlefield. After a while, He sneered and rushed over without hesitation. They were fighting and gathering. Chapter 234. Blazing Fire. Scarlet Light. Killing intent all over the sky. The sky halberd was raised in the air, and the broken spearhead almost disappeared in the night. Two gorgeous and complicated red spear blades cut through the night sky, becoming the most dazzling color. Raging flames rose from the void where the two scarlet streaks passed. They were clearly invisible flames, but at the moment of burning, they became tangible. The raging flames flew and gathered in the sky. The light of the flames was restrained, and the sparks were densely packed together, fluctuating up and down. The fire turned into water. It was like a river rushing and roaring in the void. It was like magma, a sea of fire and a torrent. The magma-like flame spread straight in the air. Wherever it passed, the forest turned into powder, and the green grass turned into a desert. The most violent flame turned into the softest liquid. There was no doubt that this was the extreme of the fire-flaming realm. Yuekong's figure broke through the river made of magma above. The dazzling and demonic red light split the world in a wave of fire. With irresistible power and killing intent, it slashed horizontally. The river in the void suddenly became violent. Wisps of blue began to appear in the blazing waves of fire. They looked like flames but also like lightning. The sky halberd was fully stretched, and the sharp sound came down from above, as if it was going to split the space. Yuekong's figure disappeared instantly. There were only a few drops of magma flowing down his white clothes in the air. The unique skill of Wuxia Palace. Dark ambush. The ferocious slash landed on empty air. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows, and the sharp killing intent soared into the sky in an instant. The killing intent whistled over the whole river, and waves of it rose one after another, endlessly. The sharp edge filled the whole space, stirring endlessly. It was like the shadow of the halberd, the sword light, and the saber aura. Li Tianlan's figure disappeared in the infinite edge, and he crossed dozens of meters in one step. The sound of the blade cutting through the air rang out. The sky halberd, which was more than 2 meters long, suddenly shook. Li Tianlan stood in the sky with his limbs fully stretched. The silver halberd was like thunder, suddenly shining a natural arc in the air. Sweeping. The wind and thunder veins in his body tightened. Extreme strength and speed were perfectly integrated, colliding with the saber light that suddenly appeared in the void. Suddenly, there was a loud sound of metal clashing in the dark night. Huge forces intertwined with each other, and the void suddenly spread into a visible wave of air. The space was collapsing, and the flame field high up in the sky exploded in an instant. Countless lightning and sparks fell from above, swirling in the air. Yuekong's furious roar suddenly became louder. The moment the two of them involuntarily retreated from the blast, he gripped the long saber in his hand and raised it above his head. It was only for an instant. Yuekong chopped down with his long saber. A dark blue saber light about 30 meters long slashed directly at Li Tianlan. The dark blue brilliance intertwined with each other, emitting crackling sounds in the air. This was a saber light, but it was more like a thunderbolt. Yuekong's figure sped up after he slashed with his saber. He gripped the meter-long saber tightly with both hands. Apart from the lightning, there was also a layer of strange green light on the shiny saber's blade. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuxia Palace, was one of the strongest superiors of the invincible realm in East Island. Tianhai Wuji was from Jifeng Sword Raining School, the oldest martial arts force in East Island. Jifeng Sword Raining School specialized in swordsmanship. Their swords were now recognized as one of the sharpest and most violent swords in the dark world. The martial arts of Jifeng Sword Raining School pursued swordsmanship, and emphasized on being faithful to the end. Even when one reached the invincible realm, he pursued swordsmanship instead of domain. As an invincible realm expert, without his own domain, he could only break the domain. Otherwise, how could he dare to call himself an invincible realm expert? The extreme of the Jifeng Sword Raining School is to break through the domain. I have a sword that can shock the world even in the invincible domain. This was another way different from the invincible realm, which was to become a domain by oneself. The Wang family of Beihai and Zhuanyuantai were the best on this road, and they went further than Jifeng Sword Raining School. Although Tianhai Wuji had founded the Limitless Palace, his martial Dao philosophy had not changed. He switched his sword to a saber, but he still didn't have a domain. He was also on the path of breaking through the domain. That was why there was the unique skill of the Limitless Palace, and Yuekong's landslide and ground cracking. Landslide and ground cracking. It was the strongest unique skill of the Limitless Palace. To some extent, this unconventional move was equal to the perfect combination of strength, speed, and willpower. The unique way of exerting force was about the most sustained outburst. One strike after another, the fastest, fiercest, swiftest, and most lethal. The moment the pale green saber light lit up in the air, Yuekong's figure suddenly flashed. The dim blue thunderbolt saber light was still moving forward. But Yuekong's figure was already keeping pace with the saber light. He and the saber light. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Or in other words, he appeared in front of the sky halberd. Whistling and spinning. Li Tianlan's face did not change at all. Only a pair of calm and deep eyes shone brighter against the saber light. The heavy and sharp sky halberd suddenly spun in his hand. Straight thrust. He still did not use any unique skill. Forgetting. Simple straight thrust. Extreme straight thrust. No one could accurately describe Li Tianlan's state at this time. It was a kind of strength and confidence that could not be expressed in any words. Standing here, he was invincible. The invincible was invincible. He was indestructible, but there was nothing he could not break. He had no shortcomings. He was grand and perfect, like the light in the night, like the darkness in the morning. He was everywhere and different. The sky halberd passed through the dim blue saber light in a rapid vibration. The thunderbolt instantly exploded under the scouring of the liquid flame. The dazzling light and shadow swept past Li Tianlan and Yuekong with sharp edges. The light and shadow were dazzling. The human emperor and the long saber collided. The pale green and the dim blue intertwined. Li Tianlan suddenly became completely violent. There was no unique skill, only the most direct and domineering attack. The human emperor was less than 3 meters tall, but it seemed to reach the end of the sky in an instant. The silver halberd whistled wildly in the air. The silver halberd suddenly swayed in the air, leaving countless residual shadows. The residual shadows merged into one and spread again. Over and over again. The deafening sound kept ringing in the air like thunder. The hundreds of meters long flame river in the air was completely boiling. The fire waves were monstrous, rising against the sky. Li Tianlan and Yuekong were falling. They kept falling. The two of them fought from the sky to the ground. The silver halberd was waved wildly, faster and faster. Silver residual shadows appeared in all directions. In the silver light, the pale green shadow was getting brighter and brighter. No retreat. Both Li Tianlan and Yuekong had tried their best, regardless of everything. Boom. The mountain forest turned into a desert. The moment the two of them landed on the ground, golden sand rose all over the sky. The boiling flame river completely lost control in the huge and fierce battle. The whole river collapsed from head to tail. It suddenly rained heavily in the desert at night. Fire rain. The high-temperature magma poured down from the sky unscrupulously, flying straight down in an endless stream. This kind of human condensed liquid flame was completely unprecedented. Even Fei Yu and Qing Shan, the two thundershocking realm experts who were ready to intervene at any time, were flustered. Not to mention the ordinary elites. The fire rain lit up the sky, dense and dense. The few elites in the No. 6 theater of operations struggled and screamed in the fire rain, shrill and desperate. Yuekong still didn't give up. At this point of the battle he was shocked and horrified, but he was more determined. Li Tianlan was very strong. In this state, he was so strong that it was incomprehensible. The young heavenly son with wind and thunder veins and top-notch inheritance was indeed terrifying, but Li Tianlan's real realm was only a half-step to the fire-flaming realm. Although it seemed that he took some medicine to forcibly raise his realm to the half-step thundershocking realm, the combat capability improved by the medicine couldn't compare with his own advancement at all. There was even a big gap between them. Yuekong was a half-step invincible realm expert himself, but now he felt suppressed by Li Tianlan in this state. It was incredible, and it made him frightened and confused. If Li Tianlan's real realm reached the half-step thundershocking realm, how terrifying would he be? Invincible below the invincible realm? The knife light slowed down and the green light faded. The pain gradually spread from his hands to his chest, and then to his limbs. At the moment when he couldn't breathe, Yuekong showed a clear sneer at the corner of his mouth. The mountain fell and the earth cracked. This unique skill was extremely domineering. Both the lethality and the way of exerting force were fierce. Although Yuekong was a half-step invincible realm expert, he could only exert force for less than half a minute. After this time he could maintain this state, but his lethality would decrease, and his body would gradually be damaged. However, although he was gradually losing strength, how good could Li Tianlan's state be? After 2 days and 2 nights of fighting, the number 6 theater of operations was almost wiped out because of him. Li Tianlan looked strong, but in fact he was already seriously injured. In the next second he might fall down. Yuekong had no reason not to hold on. He had no way out. After paying such a heavy price, his ending was already obvious. If he couldn't take down Li Tianlan, he would die. He had to die. On the contrary, if Li Tianlan fell into his hands, considering the loss of the number 6 theater of operations, he would at least not make a big mistake, even if he couldn't make a great contribution. So, take him down at all costs. Yuekong's smile slowly faded, and his lips and teeth moved slightly. A medicine bag hidden in his mouth was gently crushed by him. Some liquid flowed into his mouth, and with a burning force, it went straight down his throat and into his stomach. It was sweet, he thought. It was like the sake brewed by the palace master himself. Yuekong suddenly felt grateful to the Wang family of Beihai. For the entire East Island, the Wang family of Beihai was a nightmarish force, because the Wang family of Beihai occupied the land that belonged to East Island. It was like a thorn. For hundreds of years, several generations of Mikado died with grievances because of it. Not to mention that the Big Island, which was occupied by the royal family for hundreds of years, and had an area of nearly 80,000 square kilometers, originally belonged to East Island. Even the other part of Beihai province, at some time in history, was also the territory of East Island. For the ownership of that land, East Island had negotiated with the Wang family of Beihai countless times in the past 100 years, and in different times, they got different things. Most of the time, they got humiliated. But in some special times they also got some compensation. Although the compensation was rubbish for the Wang family of Beihai, it was very valuable for East Island. For example, the formula of some gene drugs. What Yuekong was taking right now was one of the products of the trade between East Island and the Wang family of Beihai in recent years. The drug code name was Outbreak. Although he didn't know which generation it was, the effect was beyond doubt. It could stimulate the potential of the human body to the maximum and temporarily restore the combat capability of the peak period. Although the sequela seemed to be a bit serious, it was not the time to think about it now. The juice was sweet and felt like fire when it entered the stomach. The silver human emperor seemed to lock the world. Every time it waved, it had a suffocating power. Sweeping, chopping, stabbing, spinning, hooking, rolling, strangling. Dancing in the sky wind with the halberd. Every change of the sky halberd was exerted by Li Tianlan to the extreme. Right now he didn't have any unique skills, but every move was a unique skill. Attack. 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 The silver light flickered almost violently. It seemed to be completely disorderly, but every time the silver light flickered, one could clearly feel the almost majestic battle will that was filled with it. That was the real invincible will. A born god of war. When the slowing saber light flashed again, a thought crossed Yuekong's mind. The ghastly green light instantly filled the desert. The yellow sand, the flame, and the silver light all disappeared in an instant. The ghastly green and blue completely filled everything. In the green light, the silver light with the scarlet blade of the halberd was still flying. Forward. Li Tianlan moved forward. Regardless of everything. The ghastly green saber light turned into shadows all over the sky. It fell on the sky halberd one after another. It was so fast and violent that it could topple mountains and overturn seas. Li Tianlan's figure was shaking, but he still moved forward. The human emperor stabbed forward. His pace was neither fast nor slow, but no one and nothing could stop him from moving forward. Everything could be broken. Determined, calm, and fearless, Yuekong sneered. The saber light all over the sky suddenly stopped, and his figure suddenly disappeared in the void. Only the sound of the saber blade cutting through the void kept ringing. The saber light disappeared. The human emperor stabbed forward almost still, and the strong flame shone on Li Tianlan's face. He pressed his lips tightly, and his face was as pale as a dead man's. But the human emperor was still determined. The forward stab turned into a sweep. All the air in the vicinity suddenly twisted. The heavenly halberd swept across the void, and a vast and boundless sword intent instantly spread out in all directions. The sword intent flew 100 meters. The sand was flying, and blood was splashing. The sword energy crossed the forest from the desert, and a large number of giant trees rumbled and finally exploded. The ghastly green saber light appeared as soon as the sword energy swept through, and in the blink of an eye, it had already reached Li Tianlan. The speed was like a flash. Li Tianlan's figure also flashed. Shadow formula. Switch. 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 Li Tianlan's figure disappeared 3 times. The sky halberd in his hand flashed with silver flowing light. Yuekong only felt dizzy, and then Li Tianlan's figure had appeared beside him. The distance was less than 1 meter. The huge sky halberd had disappeared from his hand. There was still silver light in Li Tianlan's hand. A silver dagger? The human emperor stab. The dagger form of the human emperor. The silver light flickered slightly. Yuekong saw Li Tianlan's eyes. Those emotionless eyes. He suddenly felt a little cold in his heart, and his scalp was numb. For a strong attacker like Li Tianlan, who was not good at defense, once he used the dagger to get close, what followed was bound to be an almost earth-shattering blow. Yuekong didn't even think about it. He tightened his body and retreated at full speed. That silver dagger had already been silently raised. The sound of it cutting through the wind, and the air was silent. Yuekong seemed to have an illusion. The saber light of the dagger was still behind him, but the blade had already reached Yuekong's chest. Yuekong had already taken half a step back in advance. The blade tore the skin on his chest and blood flew. The blade cut back. Yuekong twisted his body with all his strength. The sharp dagger stabbed into his shoulder. As Li Tianlan's arm slid lightly, Yuekong's entire arm, along with the long saber in his hand, fell to the ground at the same time. Yuekong's face instantly twisted to the extreme, but he couldn't even scream, or he couldn't care. Run! He turned around and ran away without hesitation. But the distance between them was too close. One moved forward, and the other retreated. Although the distance between them was a little wider, he couldn't outrun human emperor. The delicate dagger stretched out instantly, and the 2-meter-long sky halberd directly stabbed into Yuekong's chest. Blood spurted from the broken arm and chest at the same time. Yuekong opened his eyes subconsciously and reached out to hold the sky halberd tightly. The blade had already stabbed into his chest, and it was only a millimeter away from his heart. Yuekong held the halberd tightly, and his eyes were wide open. His eyes were full of fear and pleading. He didn't want to die, but he had to die. Li Tianlan held the long halberd tightly with one hand, stabbed forward, and walked forward. He was getting faster and faster, and Yuekong's entire body was pushed backward rapidly. Li Tianlan's eyes were as calm as ever, but the footprints left on the desert were getting deeper and deeper. Yuekong could only retreat. Moving forward became sprinting. Li Tianlan held the human emperor tightly and went straight forward. He rushed through the desert. He entered the forest. Li Tianlan rushed all the way. The human emperor pushed against Yuekong's body, and the trees were completely smashed by Yuekong's body. The forest roared. Li Tianlan was determined to kill, and Yuekong didn't give up. They entered the number 6 headquarters from the forest. As they advanced and retreated, they directly drew a straight line several kilometers long on the battlefield. Yuekong still held the human emperor tightly and didn't let it go forward, but his eyes were getting dimmer and dimmer. Boom! The human emperor pushed against Yuekong's body and smashed the iron gate of the number 6 headquarters, and then smashed a rockery used as a bunker. They kept moving forward. The two crashed into a bluestone house that looked a little old. They broke through the wall and rushed out from the other side. Rocks were flying, and smoke and dust were scattered. Yuekong, whose bones were almost broken, finally had no strength to hold on to the human emperor. With a dull sound, the human emperor pushed against Yuekong's body and directly pierced into a huge bluestone behind the house. Yuekong's body was directly nailed to the bluestone in the air. Blood was flowing. Li Tianlan held the human emperor tightly, but his arms were shaking uncontrollably. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of blood, and then a large amount of blood mist burst out of his body. Li Tianlan was in a trance, and his pupils began to dilate. Light footsteps sounded behind him. Stepping over the smashed ruins, the sound was soft, but it didn't mean to hide it at all. Li Tianlan held the human emperor tightly in his hand. It was more like holding it than holding it. He turned around and stood up straight. Everything in front of him was blurred and spinning. More than 10 meters away, a human figure stood there. He couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman, tall or short. Everything was blurred. He was looking at him, but he couldn't see anything. He was also looking at him, and it seemed that he also had a lot of uncertainties. Oh, Yuekong is dead. After a moment of silence, he looked at Yuekong, who was nailed to the bluestone, and said softly. His tone was calm and even a little elegant. Li Tianlan didn't know what he was going to do, but at least he knew it was a man, and it sounded like a relatively young man. He nodded and answered faintly, yes, he's dead. This person was useful to me, but it's a pity that he's dead. The words of the blurry young man sounded a little boring. Li Tianlan tried his best to calm the raging blood in his body and didn't speak. Yuekong is dead, but it's good that you're alive. The young man seemed to smile, and his tone was very serious. I can't catch Yuekong, so how about you go back with me? Go back? Li Tianlan asked. Yes, the young man said. You're also of great use to me. According to the original plan, I shouldn't show up now, but I don't want to wait. It's better for you to die earlier than later. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. His breath was extremely weak, but with the movement of raising his eyebrows, he looked indescribably cool and arrogant. You are? I'm Jiang Hongwei. The young man in front of him smiled and said, my code name is Dijiang. Chapter 235. Li Tianlan closed his eyes. The battle stopped, and the echo dissipated. The headquarters of the No. 6 Theater of Operations was in a mess, but it was extremely quiet. Standing in front of Li Tianlan, Dijiang's eyebrows moved. He seemed to find it interesting, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, showing a smile that was not kind but not indifferent. The boiling blood in his body calmed down. Li Tianlan's face grew paler and paler, and even gradually revealed a kind of bluish gray. He opened his eyes. His blurred vision finally became clear again, and the young man in front of him was clearly reflected in his sight. This was a young man with a perfect figure, nearly 1.9 meters tall, with an ape's back and a wasp's waist. Although his appearance looked gentle, as he raised the corners of his mouth, there was a trace of primitive wildness in his whole person. The most noticeable thing was that his arms were very long, and when they hung down naturally, they almost touched his knees. From the perspective of the opposite sex, this was undoubtedly a very attractive, even fatally attractive man. But looking at him, what Li Tianlan felt was power. Extreme power. But his code name was Dijiang. Dijiang's name first appeared in the wonderful book Classic of Mountains and Seas. He was one of the ancestors of Wizard in the myths and legends of Zhongzhou State, known to be extremely fast. He was full of power, but had such a weird code name. Even a fool would not think that his power and speed were in a state of imbalance. Li Tianlan said, I don't understand what you mean. It's very simple. Dijiang looked at Li Tianlan calmly, but in Li Tianlan's mind, he felt that he had been firmly locked by him. It will be very difficult for me to kill you here. Everything will be easy after I take you back. I won't go. Li Tianlan said lightly. His voice was very light, but the absolutely condensed will was with coldness and determination that could break the world. Dijiang said, oh, and made a move in an instant. His movement seemed not fast, but the two were more than 10 meters apart, and his arm directly covered Li Tianlan's shoulder at the first time. He was fast. Li Tianlan was faster. The moment his palm covered his shoulder, his body seemed to shake slightly, and he took a seemingly careless step forward to the left. One step was less than half a meter, but he narrowly brushed Dijiang's palm and avoided it. Dijiang's palm fell. Lightning flashed silently, and a palm-shaped palm print appeared on the ground. The palm print sank deep into the ground, leaving a palm-shaped hole in the ground. The power spread underground. There was a loud rumble. The wreckage within a radius of dozens of meters in the command center was instantly shattered. The house, the giant rock, and Yuekong's corpse were all turned into dust by the unparalleled power. The sky-piercing halberd fell to the ground. Li Tianlan casually waved his hand and held the sky halberd in his hand. Dijiang looked at Li Tianlan with a smile on his face and said thoughtfully, "Interesting. Is this night walking?" Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. Rays of sharpness began to flash from his eyes, frantic and swift. Since he came to Changdao, this was the first time he felt such a great and even fatal danger. Dijiang's smile was calm and almost gentle, but it was just a facade. This kind of calmness was completely a display of not taking anything to heart. He was unbridled and fearless. His every move was filled with extreme confidence. Night walking is said to be one of the most wonderful body movements in the dark world. The desperate chase of Sai City and the shadow formula of tribulation are both branches of night walking. The inheritance of Zhuanyuantai is indeed unparalleled, broad and profound. Take night walking for example. Everyone knows that this body movement is fast, but is it speed or reaction? Boom. Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted, and he didn't hesitate anymore. The two of them were only 1 or 2 meters away from each other. He jumped directly into the sky, and the sky-piercing halberd drew a blazing wave of fire in the night sky. The human emperor chopped down with all his strength from above. Night walking. It was one of the most mysterious unique skills in the map of God of War, which belonged to the Invincible Manual. For hundreds of years, Li Tianlan was the only one who practiced the Invincible Manual. Although the Invincible Realm warriors of the Li family could also learn some unique skills from the Invincible Manual, they didn't understand it as thoroughly as those who specialized in the Invincible Manual. That was why there were some specious unique skills. Night walking could be said to be a legendary unique skill, and in the legend, this set of body movement was fast. But was it fast or reaction? That was the essence of the technique. The silver human emperor fell from the sky, and an extreme sharpness cut the space in the wave of fire, followed by the silver shadow chopping down wildly. Bang! The human emperor chopped down solidly and hit the target. But it didn't hit Dijiang's head. Dijiang raised his hand expressionlessly. His palm went over the blade of the spear, and held the body of the halberd tightly. The scarlet and complicated blade of the spear was only dozens of centimeters away from his forehead, but it couldn't go any further. Power! Once again, Li Tianlan felt the steady, surging, and almost unimaginable power. "Too tender," Dijiang said, and his arm suddenly shook. The great power passed directly to Li Tianlan through the human emperor. Puff! Li Tianlan's whole body burst into a mist of blood, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his mouth. "Come down," Dijiang said. He pulled down his arm, and Li Tianlan, who was in the air, was almost pulled down without any resistance. His body began to fall. Dijiang held the human emperor weighing more than 50 kilograms in one hand, as light as a feather, and stretched out the other hand, trying to grab Li Tianlan's body. The air nearby was slightly twisted. A palm stretched out without any warning. It was a slender palm with slightly curved knuckles with thick calluses, and 5 fingers bent like a goshawk. Dijiang's face changed slightly, and a trace of killing intent suddenly appeared in his indifferent eyes. "Get out!" He suddenly opened his mouth, clenched his open palm into a fist, and hit the air. In an instant, the whole dark sky directly turned into a dazzling deep blue. Dijiang's entire figure abruptly turned into a dark blue ball of light, countless bolts of lightning exploding from his body without restraint. The sky and the earth were all deep blue in an instant. The loud rumbling sound spread unscrupulously in the whole forest. The wildly expanding lightning swept through the forest hundreds of meters around in an instant. Smash! Wherever the lightning passed, all tangible things within 100 meters were completely turned into nothingness. The power of one punch could destroy the world. But Dijiang's face was still gloomy. The moment the lightning burst out, he clearly saw that the palm that suddenly appeared also clenched into a fist. Their fists retracted as soon as they touched, and the next second, Li Tianlan's body had been grabbed by that palm. The man in black who suddenly appeared snatched Li Tianlan away. Dijiang held the human emperor in his hand. His eyes became cold and wild in an instant. He swept his eyes and looked directly in front of him. A thin black figure stood there quietly, with a black cloak covering his whole body. He carefully put Li Tianlan on the ground. Before Dijiang could speak, he reached out, pointed at the human emperor in Dijiang's hand, and said lightly, "Give it to me." That was the palm with which he had just punched Dijiang. There was blood on the palm, and even some white bones had been exposed. Dijiang's eyes were as cold as a knife. After a few seconds of silence, he sneered and said, "Good, very good. You snatched my prey, and now you dare to ask me for something? Not bad at all." He lifted his foot and stamped hard on the ground. Boom! A dull sound suddenly rose. Thunder and lightning suddenly rose. The whole earth shook violently in the unparalleled power, and one after another startling cracks began to extend on the earth. A dim blue light beam from the ground to the highest point of the sky suddenly became extremely bright. The light beam surged and spread to dozens of meters away, completely covering Li Tianlan and the man in black. The dim blue light was entangled wildly. A sword light suddenly rose in the light beam, tearing the night curtain and smashing the thunder and lightning. The sword light roared in the light curtain, and the vast expanse of dim blue did not cover the black figure. He stood in the endless dim blue thunder and lightning, motionless like a mountain. The sword light and the thunder and lightning dissipated silently. Dijiang stood where he was, expressionless. The black clothes on the man in black had been broken in large areas. He held the sword in one hand, and the blood flowed faster and faster on the palm of the hand holding the sword. Li Tianlan's consciousness gradually blurred, and he finally passed out. No wonder you have the double thunder veins. Your attack is really earth-shattering. But you want to kill the successor of the Li family in your first battle. Jiang Hongwei, is this the will of your master? The man in black glanced at Li Tianlan, and his tone suddenly became cold. Dijiang's face became more serious, and he solemnly said, "Do you know me?" He was the only disciple of Wang Tianzong, but he had never fought. In recent years, he had been in charge of the research institute in North America. This was the first time he fought, but his identity was seen through at a glance. Dijiang narrowed his eyes and stared at the man in black in front of him. He said flatly, "Who are you?" "Samsara. Saint." Saint took a step forward and protected Li Tianlan behind him. He said coldly, "Give it to me." His black robe was broken, and there was blood not only on his hands but also on his body. But his momentum was getting sharper. Oh, Saint, I've heard of you." Dijiang nodded. "The most mysterious supermaster in Samsara Palace, and also the most unworthy first supermaster, is you, right?" Saint did not speak. "You are no match for me," Dijiang continued. "I'll give you a chance. Leave Li Tianlan and get out of here. If you dare to stay, not to mention you can't protect him, even you have to stay. I'm curious what kind of face you have under the cloak. How dare you call yourself Saint? Ridiculous." Saint was still silent, but the sword energy on him was getting sharper. But it was just pure sword intent. He knew why Dijiang said he didn't live up to his name. During the years when Samsara was active in the Dark World, the 12 supermasters were famous, but Saint's battle record was not so earth-shattering. But his name was always listed side by side with Gongsun Qi and Tribulation. As for his real strength, no one knew. Occasionally he fought a few times, but under the circumstances that people could see, he did not show the strength of a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Maybe he didn't live up to his name? Saint lowered his head and rubbed the long sword in his hand. It was a very ordinary long sword, as clear as water, but the material was ordinary. "Why don't you get out?" Dijiang's smile gradually became cruel. If I turn around, what awaits me may be a fatal blow. And you are not qualified to ask me to get out. It's better for your master to come, Saint said blandly. How arrogant you are. Dijiang smiled casually. You are so arrogant. I'd like to see what kind of person you are. His figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. He had the double thunder veins, but he didn't feel clumsy at all. His figure flashed, and the distance between him and Saint was instantly shortened. Saint knew that this was not the so-called speed. This was the explosive power. The extreme explosive power. The lightning that was so dazzling that it could almost blind people rose up from the ground. In the sky filled with deep blue, there was a silver waterfall that flew straight down 300,000 feet. Human Emperor. The sky halberd, which was more than 2 meters long, suddenly burst out in incredible power in Dijiang's hand. The silver halberd cut through the sky, and the vast and irresistible power poured down without any scruples. The unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. The tribulation of 1,000 years. This was the move known as the extreme force. In an instant, the pure power pushed the explosive power to the peak, and the destructive power had no end. This was the move that was most suitable for Dijiang. The sky halberd danced crazily, and the silver light turned from the waterfall to the river, to the sea, surging endlessly. The tribulation of 1,000 years. 1,000 strikes were all chopped down in the shortest time, and each strike was heavier than the previous one. The sound of weapons colliding suddenly echoed in the sky, suppressing the thunder. In front of Saint, there was all the sword light. But the sword light began to shake violently under the impact of the silver light. The sword light was on the verge of collapse, and the light was getting dimmer. The light was shrinking extremely, getting dimmer and dimmer. Only the silver sea in the sky was still mighty, getting crazier and crazier. Crack. The long sword in Saint's hand instantly exploded under the silver light. The tribulation of 1,000 years was just half over, and the dim sword light was almost completely extinguished in an instant. Saint's whole body was submerged in the silver light, shaking violently. The moment the sword light died, the sword intent was born. The sword energy and the sword intent rose at the same time. The extinguished sword light broke through the suppression of the silver light, and began to expand to the limit. It was like a rebirth in the fire. There was no sword in Saint's hand, but the bright sword light suddenly shone to the extreme. It's you. Dijiang's tone showed a trace of disbelief for the first time, and he was so shocked that he was almost at a loss. The tribulation of 1,000 years fell crazily. The silver light crisscrossed the sky, one after another. But the reignited sword light was still stable. Saint was retreating, but the visible light was never extinguished. The tribulation of 1,000 years was almost over in an instant. Dijiang's figure stepped back a few steps, looked at Saint, and laughed. I didn't expect it to be you. According to the seniority, I should call you nice, but do you deserve it? Haha, you are really a big shot. You are willing to be a running dog? Saint. Do you deserve it? Do you deserve it? Saint's eyes were cold and he did not move. You are old. Dijiang took a step forward and said indifferently, Today I must take Li Tianlan away. Similarly, you should also come with me to Mount Dibbing as a guest. He raised the sky halberd in his hand, but as soon as he took a step forward, his face suddenly changed. In the night sky that was neither too far nor too near, an extremely swift and fierce killing intent instantly pierced through the air, getting closer and closer. Between heaven and earth, there was a crazy killing intent everywhere. Dijiang's face changed, and under the stimulation of the killing intent he was uncertain. Why don't you do it? I am still waiting to go with you to Mount Dibbing as a guest. Saint finally spoke in a sarcastic tone. Dijiang snorted coldly, glanced at Saint with killing intent, and then looked at Li Tianlan. He held the human emperor in his hand, and without hesitation he turned around and left. He did not know who was approaching the battlefield, but he was sure that this person was not weaker than Saint. He was not weaker than the real Saint. Saint hesitated for a moment, and let Dijiang disappear with the human emperor. He turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. Dijiang did not look back, but rushed through the battlefield, rushed through the desert, and kept retreating. The distance of a few kilometers was instantly left behind by him. His rushing figure suddenly stopped, and his face was strange. In front of him was still a dense forest. But in the forest at night, in silence, there was a perfect and dreamy figure standing quietly under the tree. Beside her stood a man in black. He did not say a word, but his whole body was filled with battle intent. At this moment, Dijiang subconsciously ignored the great enemy beside the woman. All he could see was a pair of eyes as bright as the Milky Way. Under the night, Qin Weibai stood quietly, with military counselor beside her. The night wind blew her long hair, and her eyebrows were picturesque. Chapter 236. The darkness was as deep as a curtain. Dijiang's figure cut through the night, and went away quickly with the whistling wind. The silver light was getting farther and farther away, but the sharp killing intent in the distant sky was getting closer and closer. The killing intent wasn't manic or arrogant, but it filled the whole space with extreme coldness. It was calm, indifferent, and extremely dangerous. Li Tianlan had fainted. Saint felt his pulse and heartbeat, and was slightly relieved. The number 6 theater of operations that East Island divided was neither too big nor too small. But in 2 days, Saint couldn't find Li Tianlan. It was partly because of the size of the number 6 theater of operations, and partly because Li Tianlan was too fast. There was no nonsense in a high-intensity battle. Fight, fight, life and death, retreat. Li Tianlan's every move was clean and neat, and Saint was often 1 step slower than him. At first it was like this. But through some remaining clues, Saint could gradually see that Li Tianlan's strength had broken through to a rather terrifying level. Then he wasn't in a hurry and kept following him unhurriedly. But he didn't expect that Li Tianlan would meet Dijiang at the end of the battle. If he came 1 step later, Saint didn't dare to think about the consequences. But even so, he still let Dijiang take away the valuable human emperor. At this moment, looking at Li Tianlan, who was in a coma, Saint suddenly felt a little embarrassed. The crazy killing intent in the air suddenly stopped at a moment. The night sky suddenly became clear. The killing intent all over the battlefield silently turned into an almost completely transparent shadow. The shadow fluctuated violently in the night, and then turned into a black shadow. The killing intent had completely disappeared. The place where the black shadow stood was a void. Saint furrowed his brows as if he was thinking about something. "How is it?" Tribulation, who rushed to the battlefield, asked in a hoarse voice. He and Saint were both dressed in black, but their temperaments were completely different. Saint's inadvertent every move seemed to have a torrential sword chi, but the tribulation was silent. Everywhere it passed, there was only mystery and endless darkness. He's seriously injured and too tired. Saint picked up Li Tianlan and handed him to Tribulation. After a moment of silence he continued, "The human emperor is lost." Tribulation uttered a simple syllable. "It's Jiang Hongwei. You came a step too late. Otherwise you might have been able to keep him here." Saint sighed regretfully, but there was an inexplicable brilliance flickering in his eyes. He recalled the moment of the fight and the lightning that pierced through the sky. He laughed at himself and thought that Yi Futian was indeed a terrifying junior. The double thunder veins of the Wang family of Beihai? Tribulation's tone was calm. The Jiang family of Beihai province was a well-known wealthy family. The identity of the heir of the Jiang family, and the personal disciple of Wang Tianzong, could not be a complete secret. Although Jiang Hongwei, who had double thunder veins, had never shown his strength, some big shots in Zhongzhou state would have a rough judgment. If he could grow up normally, even if he didn't enter the invincible realm, he would basically have the combat capability of the invincible realm. In the Wang family of Beihai, he was the real second expert. You shouldn't be a match for him. Tribulation said in a clear and straightforward tone. Saint is indeed no match for him. But I'm not just a saint. Saint shook his head and said in a complicated tone. He knows your identity. Tribulation's tone was indifferent, but both of them were very clear about the trouble contained in this sentence. The relationship between Samsara Palace and Sai City had been established since Saint climbed Mount Taibai for the first time. If Jiang Hongwei exposed Saint's real identity, The uproar would be enough to make the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City completely vigilant. Saint took a deep breath and said blandly, "There's no other way. If I don't draw my sword tonight, I can't stop him, and then Tianlan will be in danger." He was the first supermaster of Samsara, but the strength that Saint could show was really ordinary, roughly between the ordinary half-step invincible realm and the peak of the half-step invincible realm. There was only sword energy without sword intent, which meant that the sword had no soul. But once the sword intent appeared, it was all trouble. Tribulation held Li Tianlan in his arms, took out a bottle of blue medicine, and gave it to him. He was silent for a while. Whoosh! The silver light in the darkness cut through the night sky in an instant. The silver light was like a meteor, with a terrible momentum but no killing intent. The sharp edge fell at Tribulation's feet. A figure in a black cloak came out from the other side and said in a gentle voice, "It's all right." The human emperor that was taken away by Dijiang was still in the shape of a sky halberd. At this time, it was stuck in the ground in front of Tribulation, trembling slightly. "Military counselor?" Tribulation's whole face was hidden under the mask, and he raised his eyebrows calmly. "Nice to meet you," Military counselor said with a smile in his voice. He cupped his hands and didn't say anything about meeting for the first time. They had already met at the meeting a few days ago, although they didn't communicate. Tribulation nodded, looked at the human emperor in front of him, narrowed his eyes and said with some confusion, "This is..." I reasoned with the little guy named Dijiang. Maybe he felt he was in the wrong. That guy left his weapon and left. Military counselor chuckled softly, gentle without any sharpness. "You?" Tribulation asked in reply. "I can't do it myself, but I have you guys. Anyway, the distance is not far. I can't reason with him, but the three of us can't reason with him. That little fellow is a smart person. He's very sensible." Military counselor glanced at Saint with a smile and continued, "You don't have to worry about your identity." Saint seemed to understand something, and then he frowned. His eyes changed, and he winked at military counselor. Military counselor nodded knowingly and turned to leave. "I know Saint's identity. What about you? Who are you?" Feeling Li Tianlan's breathing getting steadier and steadier, Tribulation looked at military counselor's back and suddenly asked. Military counselor's figure paused, and then he hurried into the darkness again, as if he was in a hurry. His voice drifted through the night sky and was clear to everyone's ears. "I am military counselor. I am also the hand that holds the saber in Samsara." His figure disappeared, and he seemed to be in a hurry. Tribulation's pupils suddenly condensed. He silently looked at the direction where military counselor left. After a long time, he turned to look at military counselor and said in a low voice, "Does the saber really exist?" Saber. Invisible saber. A saber that was hard to be perceived. In Zhongzhou State, only a few people could perceive the existence of this saber, but it was vague. Not to mention Tribulation, even Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyan didn't know what the so-called saber was. "Of course it exists," Saint said blandly, "but not for a long time." Tribulation took a deep breath, looked at Saint seriously and asked, "Military counselor is the hand that holds the saber. Then who is the saber holder? Is it the master of Samsara Palace?" "It used to be the boss." Saint hesitated, but still told the truth. "When Tianlan returns, it will be Tianlan who holds the saber. He may never imagine what kind of saber the boss left for him in Zhongzhou State. I can't imagine it either." Tribulation's tone was as calm as water. "It seems that Boss Qin has made up her mind. The gift she left is indeed valuable, but it may not be what Tianlan wants. But it's what he needs most, because he is in Zhongzhou State." Saint's tone was indifferent. Tribulation stopped talking. He had never been good at emotional affairs. There was always a choice between sensibility and rationality. Qin Weibai made a choice. What about Li Tianlan? He looked at Li Tianlan, who was still in a coma, and said with a self-mocking smile, "I didn't expect the legendary saber to really exist. So what have the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City been doing for so many years? What's the point of what they have done?" Saint didn't speak, just turned around silently, and said blandly, "Let's go. There's still something to do." Tribulation didn't say more. He held Li Tianlan and disappeared instantly. On the other side of the battlefield, military counselor's figure was rushing through the forest, without any reserve of strength. Trees flashed behind him. Suddenly, his figure suddenly stopped where it was. The stifling heat was brewing in the mountain forest, bringing with it a despairing silence. Military counselor's figure slowly moved forward, one step after another. His body stopped under a big tree. Military counselor was silent, but his eyes suddenly became extremely crazy and fierce. Here. It was the place where he and the boss separated. Before they separated, the boss was resting under the tree. But now the tree was still, the boss was gone. Linen Zhongzhou State. The white mist in Mount Qingyan still hadn't dissipated. The white mist enveloped every corner of the mountain, and it was so thick that it couldn't be dispersed. The white mist flowed clearly and slowly in the night. Great Master Wu Wei, the most famous metaphysics grandmaster in Zhongzhou State, stood quietly in front of the gate of the temple. He lowered his head with a smile on his face, and looked at the flourishing flowers in front of the temple gate. Large patches of flowers had now completely covered all the roads in the temple. The ancient temple, the white mist, and the flourishing flowers were everything. A drop of red blood flowed down from Great Master Wu Wei's chest and dripped into the flowers. The old monk, whose white hair had completely disappeared, suddenly touched his bald head and looked at the night sky. The sky was still filled with white mist, and it was as ethereal as a fairyland. Drops of water were falling from the sky, penetrating the white mist and moistening the flowers and plants. "It's raining," he murmured softly, opened his mouth, but closed it again. The master was going to ask his two disciples to enjoy the rain together, but when the words came to his mouth, he remembered that his two disciples, Ruzhen and Rui, had been arranged to go to East Island by him. He sighed softly, turned around, and walked slowly into the gate of the temple. Another drop of blood flowed down from his chest. The drop of blood fell to the ground and splashed. The rain was getting heavier. Changdao International Airport. Two middle-aged monks with the same appearance, figure, and temperament slowly walked out of the hall. Both of them were dressed in simple monk robes, and their expressions were peaceful and quiet. The two monks who had been walking side by side came out of the hall in silence. They looked at each other and turned around without saying a word. One went to the east, and the other went to the west. They went further and further away. The dull night sky suddenly rumbled with muffled thunder. The dense lightning cut through the night sky before the thunder, falling from above. In an instant, the heavy rain fell on Changdao with thunder and lightning and strong wind. The stuffy heat of Changdao faded away. The overwhelming torrential rain suppressed everything. Chapter 237. Li Tianlan abruptly woke up from his coma. The countless fights in the past 2 days had long exceeded his physical endurance. The so-called coma was extremely noisy for him. The light and shadow of the fire and lightning were flashing. The weapons were colliding. The crowd was roaring and screaming. And the dense sound of explosions was heard. Chaos. Absolute chaos. All the fighting scenes in the past 2 days seemed to have happened at the same time. It was oppressive and suffocating, and the chaos made people crazy. Li Tianlan woke up in the countless flashing scenes. He opened his eyes. It was silent all around. All the scenes began to disappear with his consciousness, but there was an indescribable palpitation suddenly breaking out in the depths of his heart. He was baffled, but his body was trembling and he was short of breath, as if he had lost the most valuable thing. What on earth was it? Awake! A low, hoarse voice suddenly sounded. It was very cold but with a little soft tone. Yes. Li Tianlan responded in a low voice, still feeling the tension and palpitation brought by the crazy beating of his heart. After a while, he managed to calm down and realized that he was still on Tribulation's back. Tribulation's shoulders were not broad, but they were very stable. The thick night kept retreating as he moved forward. At this time, the two of them had left the forest and were walking quickly in a remote mountain area. "Martial uncle, I can get down." Li Tianlan moved on Tribulation's back. He was still extremely tired, but his injury had barely stabilized. The so-called stabilization meant that the injury did not continue to deepen, and some strength began to slowly recover. He exerted a little strength and directly jumped off Tribulation's back. As soon as his feet landed on the ground, his figure staggered. He took a deep breath and slowly stood firm. "How are you?" "Not bad," Li Tianlan said. He subconsciously glanced around and asked, "Where are we?" "Less than 15 kilometers from the place of the final battle." Tribulation's tone was calm and sharp. But as he spoke, Li Tianlan was surprised to find that his aura suddenly began to change. In the blink of an eye, Tribulation's figure seemed to have disappeared in the void and turned into nothingness. This change, it was not because Tribulation was too strong. On the contrary, it was because Tribulation suddenly became weak. Although Li Tianlan was seriously injured now, his realm had reached the half-step thunder-shocking realm. His absolutely abundant willpower was enough for him to exert great destructive power, even when he only had a little power. In his extremely keen perception, he could clearly sense that Tribulation's aura was constantly retreating. Right now, Tribulation was like an ant in his perception. An ant that was completely ignored. "Martial uncle, your condition?" Li Tianlan's face suddenly changed. "I'm fine." Tribulation shook his head. As he spoke, his aura became strong again, and then weak again. The sharp and cold killing intent changed several times, and finally became completely silent. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Li Tianlan's frown deepened. Judging from Tribulation's current state, it was clear that he was seriously injured to the extreme. He couldn't even control his breath at all. If his injury got worse, his combat capability would almost be completely destroyed. "Don't worry. This is a necessary adjustment, not an injury." Tribulation snorted and took a deep breath. "Let's hurry up and get there." Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. When he was about to speak, Tribulation had already started to move. He didn't slow down, but the deathly still aura on him was getting weaker and weaker. Li Tianlan followed him forward. After a long silence, he suddenly asked, "Martial uncle, what's the situation now?" Tribulation stopped moving forward. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "Not good. We're too slow, or they're too fast. The battle started the day your traces were exposed, but it's still a little late. We're making a big move in East Island now, and all the dark superpowers have started to take action. The situation is just as we predicted. The whole world is attacking East Island. The current situation in Changdao is pretty good." Then, Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows in surprise. "But a large part of the special warfare elites of East Island trapped in Huading have begun to return. Although the power of East Island and Changdao is in danger, they can always hold on. But we don't have enough time." Tribulation's tone was clear and gloomy. Li Tianlan's face changed, and he couldn't say anything for a while. The situation in East Island was good. But Huading was in chaos. But the problem was that Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and the master of Samsara Palace, the three superiors of the invincible realm at the top of the divine list, were in Huading. How could Huading be in chaos? When Huading was in chaos, a large number of East Island elites trapped in Huading took the opportunity to break out and return to Changdao. This was definitely a disaster for the elites of Zhongzhou State in Changdao. This time, Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island because two invincible realm experts and countless elites of East Island were trapped in Huading. The special warfare force inside East Island was empty, so Zhongzhou State took the opportunity to attack. How strong were the forces trapped in Huading? Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and the master of Samsara Palace were in Huading in person. Once these people returned to East Island, the strength of East Island would even be invincible. After all, this was their home field. What the hell is going on? Li Tianlan's tone was solemn. The chaos started at the border. Annan State played a rebellion. Nominally, all the troops in the north were transferred to the south. But in fact, the 5 superpowers united with the mysterious armed forces in Annan State and invaded the border of Zhongzhou State, trying to destroy the Blood Battalion. They made a big move. This time, Arsis, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, led the army with a murderous weapon. Wang Tianzong went to the border to suppress them with the human emperor. and the master of Samsara Palace. She was seriously injured and couldn't do anything. Gu Xingyin could only mobilize the third batch of elites who entered Changdao to guard Huading. The elites of East Island and Huading took the opportunity to break out. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but a considerable number of East Island elites took the opportunity to run away, including the two superiors of the invincible realm in East Island. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Somehow, he suddenly thought of the star flag in the camp where the Li family was. He asked subconsciously, "How about the border?" "The border?" Tribulation glanced at him and said, "Senior Li did it himself. Besides, it's said that there's a mysterious superior helping them. There should still be a fight at the border." Wang Tianzong and the mysterious superior returned to Huading as soon as Senior Li showed up, but they didn't have time. East Island took advantage of the time difference. When they returned, everything was almost settled. This? Li Tianlan opened his mouth and couldn't say anything for a while. He always felt that there was something wrong with this matter, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. After thinking about it, he said in a cautious tone, "The other party seems to have grasped the timing very well. Someone betrayed the country and tipped them off. Of course, they grasped the timing very well." Tribulation said lightly, "It's not just a matter of tipping off. The traitor even changed the code of the arsenal of the Border Control Corps. One after another, it finally changed the situation greatly. Now everyone is in a difficult situation." Li Tianlan felt cold all over. This general trend that swept the whole dark world was a big picture. Whether it was in the light or in the dark, it involved too many things. Zhongzhou State, East Island, Samsara Palace, the five dark forces, Annan State, the traitor hiding in the dark, and the mysterious force that cooperated with Samsara Palace. The battlefield also spread from Asia to Europe and America. A slight change in one part could affect the whole body. The situation changed from advantage to disadvantage, and it kept changing. All the major forces, down to every single person, seemed to have become a densely packed chess piece. And the general trend was the chessboard. On the turbulent chessboard, behind the darkness, there seemed to be a black hand quietly pushing all this, completely connecting all the coincidences and accidents together, and finally pushing the chess pieces on the chessboard to achieve the result he wanted. Yes. There was only this black hand. It quietly used Zhongzhou State, East Island, all the dark forces, hundreds of thousands of troops, countless superiors, and everything was under the control of the other party. If that was really the case, how much courage did he have to have? How much effort did it take? Who was the other party? What did he want to do? Li Tianlan was silent, but the intuition in his heart was getting clearer and clearer. Everything he thought was intuition. Without evidence, it was hard to even say that the speculation was accurate. It was just intuition. But he believed it without a doubt. He glanced at Tribulation, and suddenly thought of Zhongzhou State, all the superiors and a lot of things. One person, one force, one country. They were all players on the chessboard, and they were also chess pieces. But the black hand was secretly pushing the situation on the chessboard, and it even had the ability to overturn the chessboard at any time. What was more frightening was that so far, everyone was still in a state of confusion. Zhongzhou State seemed to have realized something, but it couldn't resist it. At least for now, Zhongzhou State had no choice. What they needed to do most was to completely destroy the current power of Changdao before those East Island elites came back from Huading. Now Zhongzhou State was not only fighting for victory, but also for time. And Tribulation seemed to know this, so he restrained all his aura, and put himself in a state close to nirvana. In such a state, if he wasn't seriously injured, there was only one possibility: Tribulation. When Zhongzhou State needed power the most, he was about to break through. "Martial Uncle, do you think the master of Samsara Palace is seriously injured to the point that she can't fight?" In the silence, Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Tribulation looked back at once. Chapter 238. Intentionally or unintentionally, Li Tianlan asked a seemingly ordinary, but actually extremely sensitive question. A vague question. A clear and clear answer. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan quietly, his eyes shining and sharp. Li Tianlan just walked forward quietly, as if he was thinking, or hesitating. It was Dijiang, the first disciple of Wang Tianzong, who attacked you just now. It was Saint who saved you. After a long silence, Tribulation said calmly. What are you suspecting? Nothing. Li Tianlan shook his head and looked at Tribulation. Actually, I saw it. At that time, I was not completely unconscious. I saw Saint's sword. You didn't expect it, did you? Tribulation suddenly smiled. I really didn't expect it. Li Tianlan nodded. I didn't expect it to be him. How could it be him? He had never seen Saint's sword before, but the sword intent was so dazzling that Li Tianlan had already confirmed Saint's identity when the sword energy and Nirvana sword intent broke out. Saint's reputation, like his sword intent, was well known in the dark world. Such a person was willing to be the first supermaster of samsara. Although the identity of the first supermaster was transcendent enough, it was not as free as controlling a force by himself. This matter. Tribulation thought for a while and continued with a smile. This is samsara's own internal affairs. If you are interested, you might as well ask Saint himself in the future. Boss Qin probably knows something about it. The dark world is a game of chess. Every big shot is playing, and there is no retreat. Since you can't quit, it's good to make more preparations. Li Tianlan fell silent and said no more. He knew very well that on the chessboard of the dark world, the parties involved in the game could quit. The Li family was the representative of quitting in the middle of the game. Naturally, the result was terrible. Who is the master of Samsara Palace? Li Tianlan murmured to himself. You don't believe her. I can feel that you are even guarding against her. Tribulation said. There was no extra emotion in his tone, as if he was simply stating a fact. How can I believe her when I don't even know her true identity? In samsara, I only believe her. There was no need to ask who he was referring to. Martial uncle, have you heard of the name Dongcheng Huangtu? Li Tianlan asked, looking straight ahead. At the end of his line of sight was a slightly higher hillside. There was light coming from behind the hillside, but because it was very far away, the light was a little blurry. Dongcheng Huangtu? Were they from the Dongcheng clan? Never heard of it. Tribulation was stunned for a moment and shook his head. Who is this man? Li Tianlan smiled and said calmly, I also want to know. Dongcheng Huangtu. From all aspects. This person seemed to be someone who did not exist. But Li Tianlan had firmly believed that this person did exist, or had existed before. Zhuang Huayang had never heard of this name. Tribulation had never heard of this name. Li Beitian, Ning Qiancheng, and even Dongqing Qiuqi and Dongqing Yueshan from the Dongqing clan had never heard of this name. These were just a few people, but they were enough to encompass 3 eras. Dongqing Hongguang also said he didn't know, but Li Tianlan knew very well that the old master of the Dongqing clan did not tell him the truth. At first, Li Tianlan was just curious about the name. But as things developed, especially the unusual behavior of Samsara Palace, he felt the importance of the name more and more. Samsara Palace must have something to do with Dongqing Huangtu. The master of Samsara Palace now seemed to be helping the Li family, but behind all kinds of things, who could be sure that she was helping the Li family? Or was she helping the hidden heavenly sun behind everyone's eyes? Most importantly, in his repressed memory, he seemed to have heard his grandfather mention this name. The Li family, the Dongqing clan, and the Samsara Palace. Vaguely, there seemed to be a line that connected the 3 superpowers together. And the name Dongqing Huangtu was the key of the key. If he could figure out this key, he could basically figure out what role Samsara played in the plot of Zhongzhou State, and even the final outcome of the final battle of Changdao. Was the black hand that was pushing the chessboard in his intuition the Samsara Palace? If it was the Samsara Palace, then what was Qin Weibai, who could represent the will of the master of Samsara Palace most of the time, doing? Li Tianlan did not dare to think about this question, nor did he want to think about it. What are you thinking about? Tribulation's deep voice suddenly sounded. Nothing. Li Tianlan came to his senses and said softly with emotion, I just feel that I'm not strong enough. If I'm strong enough, I can use my absolute strength to lift up all the fog in front of me and shatter everything. If he was strong enough, at your age, your achievements are enough to scare a lot of people. And you are recultivating. Although your current state is supported by drugs, if you were in your heyday, you would be one of the forces that could decide the outcome of the battle. Even if you met Di Jiang, the first disciple of Wang Tianzong, you would still be able to fight back. Tianlan, you will enter the invincible realm sooner or later. You want. Tribulation rarely talks so much, but this time, he was suddenly interrupted by Li Tianlan before he finished. Invincible realm? Martial uncle, do you know when the concept of invincible realm was first put forward? Tribulation suddenly fell silent, as if he was thinking and hesitating. It's not a secret. Li Tianlan answered his own question. Invincible realm can be said to be the peak of martial arts in the past 500 years, and martial arts was officially divided into realms for the first time. According to records, the first invincible realm expert in 500 years was not from Zhongzhou State, but from Star State. He was the god of war of Star State more than 400 years ago. He was also the one who formally put forward the concept of 4 realms of martial arts and invincible realm, and it prevailed in the whole dark world. Tribulation was still silent. At this moment, he seemed to know what Li Tianlan wanted to say, but he was a little uncertain. For realms of martial arts, invincible realm. In the end, it's just a concept. Or rather, it was just a path. How vast is martial arts? How can a road be completely summarized? The reason why the cultivation of 4 realms of martial arts prevailed in the dark world is that it can improve people's combat effectiveness faster and clarify their goals. In the journey of martial arts exploration, a clear goal means enough motivation. If there is no 4 realms of martial arts, then when a person reaches the peak of ice condensing realm, he will not know the next realm is fire flaming realm. Without a goal, how can he cultivate? Such a concept is good, but it's not without disadvantages. Li Tianlan paused, glanced at Tribulation and continued. For example, martial uncle, you only cultivate the chi controlling realm, but now you are the top superior of the half-step invincible realm, and even have the combat capability of the invincible realm. This is enough to show that the concept of 4 realms of martial arts is not perfect. At the very least, the critical point of breaking through to the ice-condensing realm in the chi-controlling realm is not the real limit of the chi-controlling realm. He is just a goal. If you don't look at this goal and continue to walk in the chi-controlling realm, you can still be invincible. Tribulation finally opened his mouth and said flatly, the concept of martial arts has never been perfect. Indeed. Li Tianlan smiled and said, so I have been thinking about a question since I was very young. For 500 years, the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai can be said to be the only heavenly son. Although the founder of Zhuanyuantai didn't have the title of heavenly son, he also had the combat capability of the heavenly son. If they were born in this era, who would be stronger between them and today's so-called superior of the invincible realm? Tribulation finally confirmed his inner guess and chuckled. You already have the answer, right? Yes. Li Tianlan also laughed. In the night, his laughter was not loud, but his whole person bloomed with a kind of inexplicable brilliance. The invincible realm is the peak of martial arts today, but maybe many people forget that the first invincible realm expert in history is actually a shame. There is a clear record of this in the map of God of War of Zhuanyuantai. About 30 years after the death of the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai, the founder of Zhuanyuantai also reached his old age. The first superior of the invincible realm in history, the god of war of Star State, was also born in this background. He put forward the concept of the 4 realms of martial arts. After he reached the advanced level of martial arts, he went east to Zhongzhou State and challenged the founder of Zhuanyuantai, who never knew what the 4 realms of martial arts were. In Li Tianlan's calm words, Tribulation's breathing unconsciously became rapid. This kind of emotion, it was like excitement. The founder of Zhuanyuantai accepted the challenge. Tribulation said. Although this matter was recorded in the map of God of War, it was not a top secret for the whole dark world. It was just that few people knew it. Yes. Li Tianlan smiled and said. In the battle in the past, in the face-to-face confrontation, The founder only used one sword move. That was definitely the most amazing sword move in hundreds of years. The magnificence of that sword move really shone through the ages. Even today, 500 years later, it was not inferior at all. Tribulation's eyes were full of fascination. He knew the result after that sword move. Back then, the so-called god of war of Star State, the first superior of the invincible realm, was directly smashed into blood mist under that sword move before he had time to make a move. The invincible realm. Who was the real invincible realm? I have only recently figured out a truth. The invincible realm is just the goal. Martial arts is just the foundation. The 4 realms of martial arts are just a path, just a path. The invincible realm is a realm. But the invincible realm is not. Li Tianlan said softly. The residential area on the verge of demolition was as quiet as a ghost town in the night. The heavy rain spread from the east. The sound of the rain shrouded the field, and the rain gradually swept to the battlefield. The thunder in the sky kept rolling. The heavy rain was majestic. A pale bolt of lightning streaked across the sky without a sound. The residential area shrouded in darkness was abruptly illuminated for a moment. Against the pale background of the whole world, the figure, which was originally integrated with the night and the void, suddenly became extremely eye-catching. In the heavy rain, the black shadow appeared in front of the dilapidated corridor. A white dress involuntarily followed the black shadow and landed on the ground. The white dress fluttered in the wind and rain at night like a fairy. She stood quietly behind the black shadow. There was no extra expression on her perfect dreamy face, but her bright eyes flashed with clear and sharp light. In the night rain, even standing behind someone, she still had a kind of peerless aura, calm and calm. I like the rain. The vague black shadow suddenly spoke with a soft voice, sounding ethereal and elegant. Because the rain can eliminate all traces. It is not good for tracking, but good for stealth. Qin Weibai tilted her head. Her bright eyes looked at the heavy rain in the sky in the blink of an eye. Her red lips raised slightly, revealing a cold and mocking smile. Are you afraid? Now I am really afraid. There was a smile in the black shadow's tone. After all, for me, tonight is an unexpected gain, but it's not a big deal. In 2 days, I will send you to where you should go. When you become my second sister-in-law, you and my second brother's children will call me third uncle. Ha, what should I be afraid of? Qin Weibai was silent. Even though the atmosphere wasn't very friendly, there wasn't the slightest hint of panic on her face, only indifference. It was an exquisite, dazzling, dreamy face. It was sharp, cold, and had a soul-stirring charm. Do you deserve it? Qin Weibai finally spoke, but her tone was simple. Whether I deserve it or not, when my second sister-in-law comes home, you will know. Even if you don't want to, so what? My second brother has been dreaming of you. If you marry into our family, I don't think he will mind using force on a weak woman like you. It may become more interesting this way. The black shadow said with a smile. You have to wait until your second brother can come back alive from Zhongzhou State. Qin Weibai sneered. In the face of the only invincible realm killer in the dark world, her figure looked so weak and helpless, but her momentum was sharp to the extreme. The black shadow's laughter stopped. He was silent for a while, then said blandly, It seems that you know who I am? Jiang Qianxia, codename Evil, the top killer in the dark world, the third master of the Jiang family of South America. Your second brother is Jiang Qianyan, right? Is it hard to guess? Another muffled thunder rolled through the sky. Pale lightning fell immediately. In the flash of light and shadow, Qin Weibai clearly saw Evil's eyes narrow. The information of Samsara Palace is really unexpected. Evil stared at Qin Weibai in front of him and sighed softly. Qin Weibai glanced at him, said nothing, and walked directly. She never thought of running away, which was tantamount to asking for humiliation. When military counselor sent human emperor to Li Tianlan, and Evil appeared for the first time, she had already known that at this time, the word running away had become a joke. She walked directly into the corridor, and without looking back she asked, Which floor? There was a flash of brilliance in Evil's eyes. No wonder his second brother was so infatuated with her. At least from the time she was captured to the present, Her performance was indeed generous and arrogant enough, which was completely different from ordinary women. "It's on the first floor, on the left," Evil said in a playful tone. Qin Weibai knocked on the door without saying anything. An ordinary-looking woman with an intoxicating charm gently pushed open the door. When she saw Qin Weibai standing at the door, she froze for a moment. Then she pursed her lips and chuckled softly. "Boss Qin, welcome. I'm Rose." She spoke softly and slightly opened her body. Qin Weibai walked into the room calmly. The condition of the residential area that was about to be demolished was naturally not very good. All the furniture had been half empty, and only a few candles were burning in the room. In the living room, there was a shabby tea table that could be treated as garbage, and there was a chessboard on the tea table. When Rose came to open the door, the other woman sitting on the other side of the chessboard did not move, but just stared at the chessboard in front of her. In the night rain, the two women seemed to be playing chess. "Make me a cup of tea." Qin Weibai naturally sat on the opposite side of the chessboard and ordered indifferently. Rose was a little stunned, and the woman sitting motionless in front of the chessboard also seemed to be stunned, and narrowed her eyes to look at Qin Weibai. "You go." Qin Weibai did not look at Rose, but at the woman in front of her with a kind of arrogance, and ordered coldly, "Yuehua. Why don't you go and make tea for second madam?" Evil came in from behind and ordered coldly. Yuehua snorted coldly, stared at Qin Weibai, and stood up reluctantly. "The place is a little shabby, so I have to trouble you. When you come to South America, the Jiang family will do its best to entertain you." Evil sat on the opposite side of Qin Weibai, looked at the chessboard in front of him, and said with a smile, "I still say the same thing. Jiang Qianyan doesn't deserve me, and neither does the Jiang family of South America. I can go back with you, but if you are willing to stay here with me and waste time, I'm afraid the Jiang family of South America will be wiped out in the Battle of Changdao." "Ha, the Battle of Changdao." Evil suddenly laughed, squinted at Qin Weibai, and said softly, "What is that?" Only a few other idiotic forces wanted to get a share of the benefits. The goal of the Jiang family of South America has never been the Battle of Changdao, nor East Island. Chapter 239. Outside the window, it was raining cats and dogs. The rumbling rain shook every corner of Changdao. The candlelight in the apartment without power was swaying slightly. The soft and tiny halo spread out and illuminated the chessboard, but the whole living room looked darker and darker outside the halo. Evil's soft and almost cold voice rang across Qin Weibai. It was very close, but it seemed to pass through the wind and rain and the halo of the candlelight. Between the lines, there was a kind of unspeakable weirdness and ghastly feeling. The old apartment was not big, but its force was quite strong. Evil, Moonlight, and Rose, even the weakest among them. Rose was a superior close to the half-step invincible realm. Such a lineup was strong to outsiders, but for Qin Weibai, who was a captive, it was the biggest crisis. Qin Weibai was still as calm as water. That was a kind of coldness and calmness that came from inside out. She slowly gathered her white skirt, looked at the unfinished chess pieces in front of her, and said softly, "Are you thinking about Samsara Palace? That's our main purpose this time." At this point, Evil thought he had everything under control, so his words became very calm. "The final battle of Changdao is nothing. Even if we win in the end and get the right to speak in the special warfare system of East Island, so what? Not only will we disperse our forces, but we also have to guard against Zhongzhou state, and even fight with the royal family. I don't deny the huge benefits, but there are also a lot of troubles. It will take at least many years to digest all this. The Jiang family of South America has no patience, and is not interested in these things." Qin Weibai looked at him strangely. Her eyes flickered, and she said thoughtfully, "Do you think it will be easier to deal with Samsara Palace than to occupy Changdao?" "It's not easy. But now it's different." Evil's cold laughter echoed in the living room. He casually grabbed a chess piece and played with it in his hand. He said in a playful tone, "Samsara Palace is the fastest growing force in recent years. In the past, the Jiang family of South America naturally wouldn't want to provoke it easily. But now there's a variable. The chess piece rubbed in his hand and made a sharp sound, but Evil's tone was getting calmer and calmer. To be honest, I didn't expect Boss Qin to show up in Changdao. This is really a surprise. Our first target was Li Tianlan. Her Highness the Palace Master and Boss Qin both care about that nonentity. As long as we bring him back, we won't have to worry about dealing with your samsara. I didn't expect that Boss Qin cared about him so much that he even came to Changdao in person. He stood up and waved his hand in the shadows, but his eyes flashed with a fiery light. It was the excitement of seeing great benefits and beautiful prospects. President Qin, I'm curious. How arrogant can you be when you view all men as dirt? In the eyes of countless people, you are an otherworldly fairy. Why would you fall for a nonentity like Li Tianlan? Look, what a good opportunity this is. I've caught you now. If I catch Li Tianlan, do you still have room to resist? He sat back down and sneered. So what if second brother doesn't deserve you? As long as Li Tianlan falls into our hands, as long as you still care, then you have no choice. At that time, in order to let the man you love live a little better, you might even take the initiative to climb into second brother's bed. Qin Weibai chuckled. Under the illumination of the candlelight, her exquisite, dreamy face carried a kind of dazzling holiness and coldness in the subtle light. Do you still want to say? She looked at Evil and said calmly, when the Jiang family of South America gets me, then use Tianlan to threaten me to deal with Samsara Palace? I haven't been in Samsara for a long time, but I can still influence some of the 12 supermasters. If Samsara Palace loses the 12 supermasters, will you attack the whole Samsara Palace by following the clues? Well, it won't take too long. My sister is still seriously injured. Maybe during her recovery, the Jiang family of South America will do all this. At that time, my sister will be all alone, and at most, she will only have some defeated soldiers by her side. And your Jiang family of South America, with 3 brothers in the invincible realm and murderous weapons in hand, won't be afraid of my sister's revenge at all. Is that right? Evil rubbed the chess piece in his hand quietly and didn't say anything. Qin Weibai continued. And because I'm in your hands, my sister will be afraid to take action, so it's hard for her to take revenge at all costs. At that time, you will force me to agree to marry Jiang Qianyan, and naturally invite my sister to join the Jiang family of South America, giving her a position that can even be on an equal footing with your elder brother. It may take a long time to turn enemies into allies, so as to swallow Samsara Palace, but it's worth it, right? Boss Qin is really smart. Evil said indifferently. He was not surprised that Qin Weibai could think of this. When the will of the master of Samsara Palace was silent, Qin Weibai was the spokesperson of Samsara Palace. Even if such a person didn't know martial arts, no one dared to doubt her mind. And if she wasn't smart, she wouldn't have made a big plan to destroy the powerful night spirit a few months ago. In that battle, in addition to the absolute strength of the master of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai's long-term arrangement behind the scenes was also indispensable. The plan is okay. Qin Weibai nodded and commented. It's not brilliant, but it grasps the weakness of Samsara Palace. No wonder you take it for granted. Take it for granted? Evil raised his eyebrows, and his tone was a little gloomy. In other words, it's a pipe dream. Qin Weibai said slowly. Footsteps sounded on the other side of the living room. Moonlight, who was extremely beautiful in black, came over with a cup of tea. She put the tea beside Qin Weibai gently, but her tone was a little meaningful. Second, madam, please have some tea. Qin Weibai finally frowned, and there was a hint of annoyance between her eyebrows. It seemed that she was extremely unhappy with the title second madam. Swish! She picked up the teacup and directly raised her hand without saying a word. The whole cup of tea, together with the teacup, suddenly flew toward Moonlight. However, her action was too obvious, and her strength was too delicate. Before the tea touched Moonlight's body, Moonlight moved her fingers slightly, and a subtle electric arc flashed. The tea was suddenly completely evaporated, and the teacup also turned into powder, fluttering in the candlelight. Get out! Qin Weibai's tone was cold and even a little gloomy. She had always been calm, but for the first time, she showed a little strength, which was extremely dazzling. She was a captive, but in the face of the three masters, at this moment, Qin Weibai was more like a master. Moonlight's eyes narrowed, and her killing intent surged. She did not step back. Second sister-in-law, Moonlight is not a servant. She is one of the visiting professors of the Jiang family of South America, and also my second brother's favorite concubine. If you sisters don't unite and get along, you will be spanked in the future, ha 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 ha. Evil laughed presumptuously and winked at Yu Hua. Moonlight retreated with a cold face. Qin Weibai was also smiling. Her smile was beautiful, like a blooming flower. However, everyone could feel the coldness and anger behind her smile. Remember what you said. Qin Weibai's tone was calm, not ostentatious, not sharp, more like an irresistible judgment. No one dares to talk to me like this. You will pay the price, and so will the Jiang family of South America. Second sister-in-law, you are so domineering. Evil sneered with a fake smile. But here, you'd better accept your fate. My fate is in my own hands. Qin Weibai's eyes were shining, but behind the brilliance was indifference. In your hands? Evil sneered. If it's really in your hands, why are you here? Because I need to be here, so I was caught by you. Qin Weibai looked at Evil and sneered. Otherwise, what do you think it is? The general trend is like a chessboard. You are high above and each of you thinks you are a chess player. I am different. I am willing to be a chess piece. When necessary, I want to be here, so I am here. No one can stop me. She picked up a chess piece, put it on the chessboard and pointed at the place where she put it. Like this. I don't believe it. Evil was silent for a long time, and then said with a smile. He looked down at the chessboard, put down a chess piece and said coldly, Second sister-in-law can't control the situation of this game, let alone the general trend. The result has been decided. What can you do? The result has not been decided. Even if I lose at least, I can still. She suddenly reached out her hand and turned over the chessboard in front of Evil's astonished eyes. The black and white chess pieces flew up in the flickering candlelight and fell to the ground. The sound was as clear as the rainstorm outside the window. Qin Weibai leaned forward slightly. At that moment Evil, who had entered the invincible realm, subconsciously shrank back. Qin Weibai stood up with a cold smile and said blandly, I am here, watching your plan. Tianlan is a variable, and I am the key. Do you really think you can catch Tianlan? You can kill him, but you will never catch him. Don't deny it. She said coldly, he is my man. Do you know my man better than I do? The anger in Evil's tone began to grow. He sat up straight and said in a deep voice, You really don't care about Li Tianlan's life or death? I do. Qin Weibai's tone was clear. Thunder rolled outside the window. Her voice was as cold as the pale lightning shining outside the window, without sadness or joy. Then let him die. Evil's body shook. It was incredible. Qin Weibai's eyes softened quietly. In fact, many people, even saint and military counselor, didn't know that she cooperated with the mysterious highness in East Island, not to let the mysterious organization completely ensure Li Tianlan's safety. On the surface, a consortium was used as a bargaining chip, but in the dark, countless contributions were made. How could she just want Li Tianlan to be safe and sound? What she wanted was more after Li Tianlan's death. If a man didn't die once, how could he make a great breakthrough? The rain fell in every corner of Changdao. In the heavy rain that almost blinded people, a middle-aged monk in plain monk robes walked along the airport highway and came to a medium-sized villa area in the western suburbs of Changdao. The rain was heavy. The heavy rain fell from the sky, but it bounced off the air 5 or 6 meters away from the monk. He was still dry in the rain. He looked at the villa in front of him and walked directly to the gate. A black luxury car drove over from the gate and finally stopped in front of the monk. The bright car lights shone on the monk's face. The monk didn't move, just put his palms together and saluted. A handsome, almost enchanting man quickly got out of the car and came to the monk. In the rain, his cold voice seemed to soften a little. I'm Daybreak. Nice to meet you, master. The monk saluted again and said apologetically, I'm Rui. There was an accident, so I came a little late. Daybreak's expression changed. He pulled the monk into the car and asked with concern, "How is Great Master Wu Wei?" "Master," Rui said softly. He looked sad and said no more. Daybreak's heart sank, but he didn't say anything more. He changed the topic and said with a smile, "His Highness is waiting for you. You came later than scheduled, but it's okay." The car drove quickly in the rain, and finally stopped in front of a villa in the center of the villa area. Along the way, the whole villa was silent, but it was brightly lit. Countless raindrops became clearer in the continuous lights. The whole villa area seemed to be suppressing something with the rain. Rui observed silently without saying a word. Another enchanting man who looked slightly like Daybreak came over and opened the car door for Rui. He said with a smile, "Master, I'm Dawn." "I am Dawn, please." Rui nodded silently, touched the things in his arms and walked to the villa. Dawn and Daybreak didn't go in. They stood in front of the door, looking at the rain in front of them, quietly waiting for the result of this quiet, but very important meeting. Finally, Daybreak said softly in a complicated tone, "It's about time." Dawn looked at the brightly lit villa area in front of him, and said in a low tone. He was silent for a while and then said softly, "Brother, do you think His Highness can get what he wants?" "How do I know?" Daybreak was silent for a while and finally shook his head. He knew what Dawn was talking about. After returning to Changdao from Ninghu, His Highness had been staying in this villa alone. He didn't eat or say a word. Their young master, Huawu, was dead. No one could imagine how sad and desperate His Highness was when he heard this news. It was just a few days' difference. If it was a few days later, their young master, the teenager named Huawu, would be born in the final battle. The name of the heavenly son. Just a few days later. This time Rui, the disciple of Great Master Wu Wei, the metaphysics grandmaster of Zhongzhou State, came to Changdao, which was part of the plan. But now His Highness wanted to find out who killed Huawu. Great Master Wu Wei might have the ability to give clues about this matter. But this was out of the plan. Was Great Master Wu Wei really willing to help? If he really knew the murderer, would His Highness vent his anger on the enemy? Or would he focus on the final battle? After being silent for many years, there was no one in the world that His Highness couldn't defeat. His anger. Daybreak looked a little pale and didn't know what to say for a while. Great Master Wu Wei gave us a name. It should be in line with the general trend. Brother, what do you think our organization will be called in the future? Dawn changed the topic and asked. Daybreak smiled and said slowly, "We'll know in a minute." It was quiet in the villa. The monk walked into the hall of the villa and saw the man sitting on the sofa for the first time. He didn't sit in the middle of the sofa, but in a corner. But the feeling he gave off was too real. So real that even though his appearance was not outstanding, he could still make people notice his existence at first glance. "Greetings, Your Highness." Rui took the initiative to pack his luggage with a calm expression. Master Rui is too polite. The mysterious Highness's tone was calm and low. He didn't seem to be in a good mood. He glanced at Rui and said straightforwardly, "Have you brought it?" Rui nodded as usual, took out a letter from his arms, and handed it over respectfully. His Highness waved his hand, and the envelope fell directly into his hand. Without hesitation, he tore open the envelope. There was only a very simple piece of white paper in the envelope. 8 simple words were juxtaposed on the white paper. The rest were blank. The origin of the purgatory, God lives in heaven capital. Only these 8 words. His Highness looked at it silently and didn't speak for a long time. His question was not answered, and his invitation was not responded. No response was also a response. "Thank Great Master Wu Wei for me," His Highness said slowly after a long silence. "I have one more thing to ask, Your Highness." Rui stood where he was and said softly, "Please go ahead." His Highness's eyes were still fixed on the 8 words on the paper, and his tone was calm. "I hope Your Highness can help a person." Rui's expression was calm, but His Highness's fingers holding the letter froze slightly. He slowly turned his head and looked at Rui in front of him. After a long time he said indifferently, "How can I help him?" He didn't ask who that person was. He knew without asking. "Just like Your Highness did in those days, I hope Your Highness can help me." Rui's tone was dull, as plain as tasteless water, without any personal emotion. His Highness looked at the middle-aged monk in front of him quietly, and his eyes gradually became cold. It was not a direct anger, but more like a kind of anger. I also have one thing to ask, Master. He tapped the paper beside his hand and said softly, I want to know who killed Huawu. Rui was silent. They looked at each other for a while, and then Rui looked away and said calmly, there is an answer in the letter. There were only 8 words on the letter. The origin of the purgatory, God lives in heaven capital. There was nothing else. No answer was the answer. His Highness didn't seem to be smart, or he was extremely persistent. He stared straight at Rui, waved his hand, and the letter floated directly in front of Rui. The paper was suspended in the air, and the pages stretched straight in the air. I can't see the answer, he said. Master Rui, if you see it, please tell me. He said word by word. Who on earth killed Huawu? Rui sighed softly, put his palms together and said, since there is no answer, I can't say it. Why are you so persistent, Your Highness? Can't say it. Not can't say it. His Highness's eyes suddenly surged with a trace of fire, and he said in a deep voice, that's my son. Rui stopped talking and stood still, keeping the posture of putting his palms together, and was as silent as a statue. His Highness suddenly smiled. That smile was real and bright, but his eyes were full of indifference. Since you don't allow me, why should I help others? He looked at Rui and asked very seriously. In Rui's silence, he suddenly stood up and said angrily, why should I help others? Boundless sharp sword intent burst out around him in an instant. The sword intent swept through every space in the living room. Rui's monk robe was cut one after another, and his body was dripping with blood. Dense sword marks fell on the wall, and the whole living room was full of sword intent. That person has wind and thunder veins. That person wants to make great achievements. That person is called the Heavenly Son. What about Huawu? Does my son deserve to die? Huawu is dead, and I want to take revenge, but the Master doesn't allow me? He doesn't allow me, so why should I help him help that person? Why? That person deserves to die. He deserves to die the most. His Highness's voice was bold and aggressive. He looked at Rui coldly and said firmly, I don't accept it. Why? Responsibility. Rui, who was covered in blood, looked as usual and said calmly, Your Highness has your responsibility. His Highness suddenly became silent and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, he opened his mouth and said coldly, I just don't accept it. Rui chanted the name of Buddha, bowed slightly and sighed. Master said to be impartial. He didn't look at His Highness's expression or at the blood on his body, and turned to leave the villa. His Highness didn't stop him. Impartial? Heh, what a good impartial. The sneer on his face faded little by little, but his eyes were shining with stubborn light. Rui's figure walked out of the villa. The sound of the door closing came behind him. Chapter 240. What was the place of the final battle? When Li Tianlan asked Tribulation, his answer was simple. Climb over the mountain in front of you. The undulating mountains were not actually peaceful. East Island used a lot of manpower to deal with the final battle. Countless patrol squads were scattered all over the battlefield. Tribulation and Li Tianlan, who deliberately suppressed their state, kept detouring in the mountains. It took them 2 hours to get close to the edge of the mountains, which was more than 10 kilometers away. The heavy rain swept the whole battlefield without warning. The messy water splashed down from high places. Under the sky, the mountains were hazy. The hillside in front of them, which had become clear gradually, was hidden in the rain again and became more and more blurred. The two of them kept speeding up in the heavy rain. In the end, they were walking in a straight line. At the most critical moment of the heavy rain, fighting and killing had become the only melody in Changdao. There was no pure land in the battlefield. Before Li Tianlan climbed over the hillside in front of him, the fierce battle had spread to the inside of the mountains. The rain was getting heavier, but the sound of the rain had disappeared here. Amidst the splashing rain, there were frenzied and concentrated gunshots and explosions everywhere. The loud noises completely drowned out the torrential rain. Occasionally, there would be an unwilling and angry roar, but it was quickly drowned out by the sound of explosions that filled the entire battlefield. Fine lightning flashed in the air. The moment the whole mountain was illuminated, several figures rushed up from the other side of the hillside. The rain was pouring down. A thick ice wall suddenly appeared less than 100 meters away from Li Tianlan. The ice walls were like 4 walls, completely covering the few people who had rushed into the mountain area. The sword and tent danced and flashed in the cage formed by the ice walls. Gunshots rang out for a moment and then died away. In the flashing sound, the 4 huge ice walls completely shattered under the invisible pressure. Several corpses were thrown out with a lot of broken ice. A quiet and pretty figure stood quietly in the heavy rain. She looked around at the corpses around her. It should have been a very delicate and lovely figure, but at this time, in the heavy rain, she had an indescribable coldness. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. The woman in the rain saw him at the same time. Under the cover of the heavy rain, her body slightly stiffened, and there seemed to be panic in her eyes. Qingyan. Li Tianlan took a few steps forward and finally saw the woman in front of him. He said in a surprised voice, "Why are you here? Aren't you with Qiancheng?" Brotherly. Amidst the chaos, Yu Qingyan, who had gotten together with Ning Qiancheng in a very short time, smiled sweetly. Her voice carried the unique brightness and joy of a young girl. "You're really fine." Everyone was worried to death. Tribulation walked up to Li Tianlan silently and said nothing. Yu Qingyan, who did not notice the existence of Tribulation at all, was startled. She bowed and said obediently, "Hello, teacher." Tribulation nodded and said nothing. He just looked at Yu Qingyan in front of him with an unfathomable look. Li Tianlan did not notice this. He frowned briefly and asked calmly, "How is everyone now?" "Not so good." Yu Qingyan lowered her head and looked at the water falling in front of her. She whispered, "Many people have died, but we are all fine. I worked together with Qiancheng, as well as some elites from the Eastern Theater of Operations, but we were separated just now. I'm going to look for him now. Big brotherly, are you coming with me?" Li Tianlan was stunned and then glanced at Tribulation. Tribulation was still staring at Yu Qingyan. Noticing Li Tianlan's movement, he shook his head and said, "Nothing will happen for the time being. You go back with me first." Li Tianlan nodded. He was really not in a good state now. At least, he had to deal with some wounds completely. "You go first. Contact me anytime if you need anything." Li Tianlan looked at Yu Qingyan and said. Yu Qingyan was also a member of the East Emperor Palace. But at present, the East Emperor Palace did not have its own communication system. The system they used belonged to Sai City. However, Li Tianlan's equipment was completely damaged in the battle, so he had to get a replacement as soon as possible after returning. "Okay. Take care of yourself, big brother Li." Yu Qingyan wrinkled her nose and instructed in a serious tone. Li Tianlan nodded with a smile, and went straight to the hillside ahead with Tribulation. The intense and scattered gunshots echoed in the night rain, getting clearer and crazier. The moment they were about to climb the hillside, Li Tianlan suddenly turned back. In his sight, Yu Qingyan was still standing there quietly not far away. Her eyes were like a pool of clear water without any ripples, soft and quiet, innocent and pure, with a little confusion. Noticing Li Tianlan's gaze, she smiled sweetly again and waved at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan remained calm and quietly watched Yu Qingyan turn around and go farther and farther in the night rain. "This girl is not simple," Tribulation suddenly said. "She is Yu Donglai's granddaughter. Elder Yu was one of Grandpa's guards in those days. His descendants are trustworthy," Li Tianlan said calmly and casually. In his sight, Yu Qingyan's figure seemed to be speeding up. Her shadow became more and more blurred and finally disappeared in the depths of the night rain. But she was still moving forward. The heavy rain drenched her, who had not yet entered the fire-flaming realm, but her eyes were always clear and bright. She had been moving at the fastest speed to the other side of the mountain with great clarity. Forward. Turning. Roundabout. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. Yu Qingyan was the only one walking silently in the whole mountain, patient and persistent. In the rain, She walked at the fastest speed for 7 or 8 kilometers. After confirming that no one was following her, she turned around and lightly set foot on the road on the other side of the mountain. Then she turned back. The road was slippery and straight leading forward. There were mountains on both sides of the road. Less than a kilometer ahead, there was an intersection. Turning left at the intersection and walking forward for 500 meters, she should see a small and ancient road marker. Yu Qingyan silently calculated and moved forward. Under the night rain, her figure was lonely and at a loss, like a lost elf. Everything was consistent with the information she had. Turning left at the intersection, this road would eventually lead to the outside of the battlefield. The road marker she was looking for stood quietly on the side of the road, lonely and inconspicuous. Yu Qingyan stood silently in front of the road marker and reached out to touch the wet stone marker. After hesitating for a long time, her slender palm exerted a little force, as if she wanted to pull the stone marker up. Ahem! A light cough sounded behind her and clearly passed through the rain. Like a frightened rabbit, Yu Qingyan turned around abruptly and looked behind her. A woman who looked about 30 years old appeared behind Yu Qingyan. Red leggings, a red women's shirt, and red high-heeled shoes. Under the heavy rain, the woman was like a flame burning proudly in the rain. Arrogant. This was the most obvious label on her. Yu Qingyan's eyes were flustered, but she bravely looked at the woman in red in front of her. This scene should not have happened in the plan. Now all this made her a little confused. What are you hesitating for? The woman in red said with a mocking look. Her face was extremely beautiful, which combined with her extremely proud temperament, suddenly made her look wild and gorgeous that made people crazy. This belongs to us. His Highness gave it to your grandfather for safekeeping for the time being. What are you hesitating for now? The woman in red said in a light tone. She was about the same height as Yu Qingyan, but standing together, she had an obvious condescending feeling. That's because no one will do better than my grandfather. That's why you chose us. That's all. Yu Qingyan plucked up the courage to look at the woman in red in front of her and said. So what? The woman in red's tone was cold. She reached out to Yu Qingyan and said, Give it to me. Yu Qingyan hesitated for a while, and finally began to reach into her pocket, and took out a crystal-clear bottle from it. This bottle was extremely small, but it was bright and resplendent. Its entire body was made of the highest quality crystal. 2 drops of indescribably magnificent fiery red liquid were contained in the bottle. The luster reflected off it, and a small part of the night sky nearby was reflected into a fiery red. The woman in red took the bottle and carefully put it away. She looked at Yu Qingyan and said coldly, We shouldn't have met today, but you hesitated for too long. Go back and tell your grandfather that he'd better keep the things that don't belong to him. If he dares to have other ideas. She did not continue, but left behind a meaningful sneer. Yu Qingyan bit her lip and did not speak. The woman took a deep look at her, turned around and walked into the rain again. The meeting between the two sides was extremely hasty. It was like a deal, but also like a tacit understanding that was difficult for people to understand. Both the woman in red and Yu Qingyan knew what was in the bottle. It was the hottest poison in the dark world, codenamed Sazaka blood. The woman in red also knew Yu Qingyan's name, origin, and all the background. But Yu Qingyan did not know that the woman in red's codename was Phoenix. Chapter 241. Li Tianlan finally climbed the hillside in the increasingly crazy rainstorm that seemed to drown Changdao. Behind the hillside was a vast and flat plain. The scenes of chaotic fighting and killing that he had imagined didn't appear. Instead, there was darkness and rain everywhere in front of Li Tianlan. Intense gunshots came from all directions. In the closest place to his line of sight, he could vaguely see the silhouettes of people fighting together. He couldn't tell which faction they belonged to. The air was violently distorted. Countless raindrops were like swords, splashing in all directions. One after another, ice walls rose in the night rain and then shattered. Occasionally, there was a fire in the distance. It burned fiercely for a moment, and then went out. Blood splashed near Li Tianlan and instantly blended with the rain. The blood was hot. The rain was cold. Manic and angry roars sounded from time to time, as if they would never stop. The flat road was completely smashed in the battle. The green turf was lifted into the air. The tall trees fell down one by one. The flashing bullets flew back and forth in the air like shooting stars. Fighting, killing, bathing in blood, risking one's life. The final battle seemed to be white-hot, but it was unexpectedly messy. There were no tragic and heroic collisions between thousands of people. It seemed that it would never be the style of the Dark World. On this vast battlefield, a large number of elites were scattered in different places. When the battle was unprecedentedly fierce, Li Tianlan stood on a high place and felt that most of the place was empty. This is just a part of the final battle. Tribulation's voice sounded beside Li Tianlan. There are battles everywhere on the battlefield. This area in front of us is even a relatively small one. The heavy rain almost completely blocked Li Tianlan's sight. He couldn't tell how big this area was, but the vague figures were dozens of meters away from each other at the closest. The place of the final battle. In Changdao, every corner where the enemy could be seen was the place of the final battle. Rear. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. He just said 2 words, and then he fell silent. As expected, Tribulation smiled and said in a cold voice, "Rear. There is no rear. We only have a temporary station now. After all, this is the territory of Changdao. Here, we only have a way forward, not a back." Li Tianlan fell silent. He took a deep look at the battle in the dark. After a long time, he said softly, "Let's go." "Forward." Tribulation said, "The station is 6 kilometers away." 6 kilometers ahead from here. Li Tianlan knew that place. It used to be the station of Jifeng's sword training school, and it was the first place where he was exposed. Sunset Shadow, the top assassin of Sai City, died together with the Big Dipper, an expert of the half-step invincible realm of Jifeng's sword training school. Li Tianlan went down the mountain in silence. The closer they got to the station, the faster they moved. The station of Jifeng's sword training school was now occupied by Zhongzhou State, and the forest around the village was also cordoned off. Tribulation and Li Tianlan successfully entered the village after passing through 3 cordons. The people of Zhongzhou State were having a meeting at this time. They said they were having a meeting, but they were actually waiting for news. The news from Huading had reached Changdao half a day ago. Huading was in a mess now, but fortunately, it didn't suffer too much damage, because a large number of superiors imprisoned in Huading started to hide as soon as they got out, and then they tried to find a chance to return to East Island. East Island was their foundation. Now that their home was in complete chaos, they naturally had no time to avenge their imprisonment. Although the experts in Huading had also captured some people, more people had left Huading. The 5 Invincible Realm experts worked together to break out of the encirclement. Tianhai Wuji was slightly injured, Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, was seriously injured, and Jiang Qianyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, was slightly injured. Although the injuries were different, the 5 experts had all broken out of the encirclement and were almost on their way back. Among the 5 great experts, Chaos of the Divine Temple, Huan Kong, the master of Fantasy World, and Jiang Qianyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, would definitely not come to East Island, especially Huan Kong and Chaos. Their foundations in Northern Europe and North America had long been destroyed by Situ Tsangyue and Gu Qianchuan. What they needed to do most was to go back and stabilize the overall situation. But Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Sangchuan, the 2 local grandmasters of East Island, would definitely come to Changdao as soon as possible. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was in charge of the battlefield, was also there. 3 Invincible Realm experts. There were also a large number of East Island Special Warfare Masters who had escaped from Huating. Once they returned to East Island, the final battle of Changdao would be inevitable. The situation in Zhongzhou State was getting worse and worse. Buying time had become their only choice. Before the 2 grandmasters, Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Sangchuan, returned to Changdao with a large number of experts, Zhongzhou State had to inflict heavy damage on the remaining forces of East Island first, and then have a chance to win in the next severe situation. So half a day ago, Tribulation made a move. Not only Tribulation. Azure Dragon Gongsun Qi of Zhongzhou State, Firmament of the Wang family of Beihai, Gu Zhendong of Kunlun City, Mount Shu, Eastern Theater of Operations, Shadow Sting Troop. All the experts walked out of the battlefield almost at the same time. The order to completely detonate the final battle was conveyed to everyone in Zhongzhou State. That was what Tribulation learned before he left. But in just half a day, Tribulation brought Li Tianlan back. When they walked into the temporary meeting room of the village, almost all the experts came back. The meeting room of the village was a relatively large bungalow with simple decorations. When Li Tianlan and Tribulation walked in, there were still many people standing in the meeting room. The atmosphere in the meeting room was a little depressing and scary, and everyone looked extremely gloomy. Li Tianlan's return caused a small commotion, but it soon subsided completely. There were only a few people who were worried about Li Tianlan. Li Beitian, Ning Qianqing, Du Hanin, and other young people were not there. Deep Dream was standing with Thunder God of the Dongqing clan and Bai Yuming, the first miss of the Bai family. Seeing Li Tianlan, the gloomy expressions of the three eased a little at the same time. They nodded to Li Tianlan, but did not speak. The atmosphere was a little strange. It's good that you're back. Gong Sun Qi, who was sitting in the main seat, looked at Li Tianlan, nodded, and said, "How are you feeling?" "I need to deal with the wound, rest for a while, and eat something," Li Tianlan said in a calm tone. Gong Sun Qi nodded. When he was about to speak, Tribulation's low and hoarse voice had spread all over the room. Tianlan has wiped out the No. 6 Theater of Operations of East Island alone. Most of the experts, including Yuekong, a half-step invincible realm expert, have died. Boom! There was an uproar, and a wave of voices rose in the somewhat narrow meeting room. Although there were many theaters of operations in East Island, there were no more than 10. Li Tianlan wiped out the No. 6 Theater of Operations alone, which meant that he wiped out more than 1/10 of the forces of East Island at this time. What kind of achievement was this? This kind of achievement had vaguely surpassed the meaning of the 4 words, "Young Heavenly Son." "But what are you doing?" Tribulation's voice continued. Gong Sun Qi's face changed. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan, nodded, and said, "Awesome. It's just a fluke." Li Tianlan looked tired and shook his head. Gong Sun Qi waved his hand and arranged Bai Yuming to take Li Tianlan out to have a rest. When the two figures disappeared, he smiled bitterly, looked at Tribulation, and said helplessly, "The situation has changed." Tribulation simply said to express his doubt. "All the people of East Island have retreated." Gong Sun Qi took a deep breath and said calmly, "To be exact, all the experts have retreated. A few hours ago, a large number of cannon fodder suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Most of them didn't even enter the 4 realms of martial arts. Only a few reached the Qi-controlling realm and the ice-condensing realm. As for their experts, none of them could be found." Tribulation's eyes narrowed. Cannon fodder? Even if they are cannon fodder, they are elites. I guess these people are probably from some secret forces of East Island. Who knows what they are when they take off their uniforms? At least for now, they are cannon fodder to consume our strength. Gong Sun Qi said coldly, "We can't find any experts, so we can only temporarily withdraw all the combat capability above the thunder-shocking realm, leaving only our ordinary elites to deal with them. We are racing against time." Obviously, Shinichi Miyamoto has made up his mind to stall for time. Tribulation was silent. After a long time, he asked directly, "What's your plan?" "Cooperation," Gong Sun Qi said calmly. "This is the only way at present. Cooperation with the people of the 5 superpowers. 2 hours ago, I sent someone to contact the Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance. When those people from East Island come back, we won't have a good time, and neither will they. So the best way now is to form a joint force. If we can cooperate, even if we can't win this final battle, we won't die." Tribulation raised his eyes and looked at the others in the conference room. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. Who could have thought that Zhongzhou State, which had the upper hand in the beginning, would be forced into such a dangerous situation? "What did they say?" Tribulation asked. Still waiting for the news. Gong Sunqi shook his head. But before he finished speaking, his face suddenly changed. The atmosphere in the conference room became slightly silent. Gong Sunqi's eyes suddenly became cold. No need to wait. He took a deep breath and said softly, I have received the news from my team. An hour ago, the Polar Ground Alliance refused our request for cooperation. And King Bear even slaughtered a squadron of the Shadow Sting army. Before everyone could get angry, Gong Sunqi continued. Half an hour ago, the Heroes Club also attacked us. The Heroes Club also attacked us. The conference room fell into complete silence. The attitudes of the two superpowers were enough to explain too many problems. In just half a day, Zhongzhou State had gone from a dangerous situation to a desperate situation. Unconsciously. Chapter 242. Shinichi Miyamoto looked at the battlefield in front of him quietly. There were fights near the station of Zhongzhou State, and there were also sporadic fights around the headquarters of East Island. The general trend and the chaos intertwined. The battlefield of hundreds of kilometers in Changdao was like a quiet hell right now. Once there was a sound, it almost meant a fight. The quarrel behind him came from the huge and gorgeous tent. The voices were getting louder and louder. And the tone was getting sharper and sharper. The questions seemed to be directed at Shinichi Miyamoto, rude and presumptuous. Shinichi Miyamoto walked forward a little, leisurely enjoying the rainstorm in front of him. The distance between them was widened. The quarrel behind him suddenly quieted down. Shinichi Miyamoto lowered his head to look at the time on his watch and frowned. The quarrel behind him became clear for a moment, and then it became blurred again. The curtain of the huge and gorgeous tent in the center of the headquarters was lifted and then put down. A slim figure in red walked up to Shinichi Miyamoto with an angry look on her face. This was a young woman who looked to be only 25 or 26 years old. She was over 1.6 meters tall and looked very petite, but her face was extremely charming, seductive and wild. The woman wore a long red dress with a high slit. There was a strong wind in the night rain, which blew up the hem of her dress. A pair of white and slender legs were suddenly exposed in the air. In the messy rainstorm, the red figure stood behind Shinichi Miyamoto, and the whole night seemed to be more colorful and fragrant. Master, those people are too much. The woman looked at Shinichi Miyamoto, who was motionless, and said while biting her pink lips. She was extremely beautiful and charming. Even though she was angry at this moment, she gave off a delicate feeling that seemed to be both angry and resentful at the same time. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't say anything. The woman looked more and more aggrieved. She had a long red silk tied around her waist, which tightly wrapped around her slender waist. The two ends of the red silk hung down to her thighs. Two small folding fans were tied to the two ends of the red silk, swaying gently in the wind. The woman reached out and grabbed the folding fans along the red silk. With a swish, she opened the folding fans. The blades of the fans tore the curtain of rain apart violently, and a scorching heat wave rose in the cool rain. I really want to kill all those people. They are like mad dogs, biting people everywhere. Master, can I go in and kill them? The woman smiled sweetly, and a cold killing intent immediately burst out from her smile that could captivate one's soul. They are the ones who died. It's normal for them to be agitated. Shinichi Miyamoto looked back at his best disciple and said in a calm tone, agitation and insult are two different things. Do they really think they can insult our special warfare area just because they are generals? What? They seem to be quarreling with High Priest Tianyue, but in fact you are our master, they are you. The woman said hatefully, and her charming smile became even more resentful. Shinichi Miyamoto smiled and didn't say anything. He was the one who gave the order to East Island's current turtle-like tactic. If the superiors withdrew temporarily, it was necessary to send a large number of elites to fill in the gaps, and even to consume the enemy's strength. Miyamoto, and Lee. But the term cannon fodder was limited to this battlefield. After all, this was a dark collision between superpowers and countries. Zhongzhou State had more than 1,000 people in Changdao right now. It wasn't a lot, but each of them had at least entered the 4 realms of martial arts. How could ordinary Miyamoto hurt them? The so-called Miyamoto sent out were all the elite troops of the East Island Army. This was the home court of East Island. As long as the soldiers took off their uniforms and military ranks, who could say they were soldiers? Even if everyone knew it, no one would say they were breaking the rules. They had the home court advantage. If Shinichi Miyamoto said they were combatants of the special warfare system, then they were. In this way, Shinichi Miyamoto wouldn't face the pressure from the outside, but he would face the pressure from the inside. The East Island Miyamoto, cannon fodder wandering in the battlefield, were actually the elites of the East Island Army, and they were temporarily integrated into the special warfare system. But Shinichi Miyamoto asked them to be Miyamoto, to consume the enemy's combat power. As soon as the decision was announced, Shinichi Miyamoto received strong protests from the military. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't care. He was the commander-in-chief of the battlefield, and his orders were absolute. As soon as the order was issued, nearly 6,000 Miyamoto cannon fodder were sent to the battlefield. They were simply the most expensive batch of Miyamoto cannon fodder. But Shinichi Miyamoto sent them out without hesitation to consume the power of Zhongzhou State, delay the attack of Zhongzhou State, and achieve the final victory. This method was understandable, but not everyone could accept it. Several generals of the military in Changdao came to the general headquarters as soon as possible. The cannon fodder sent by Shinichi Miyamoto were the elites of the military, and most of them were elites from some ace armies. And the generals who came to the general headquarters were also from the ace armies. They could be said to be the most powerful force in the military. Shinichi Miyamoto avoided meeting these people. He asked Tianyu, the high priest of Ayase Grand Shrine, to handle everything, and asked his best disciple, Mai Shiranui, to participate in the discussion. As a result, not long after the meeting started, Mai Shiranui was mocked by several generals and almost lost her temper on the spot. After she left in anger, the meeting in the tent suddenly became more lively. That's expected. Shinichi Miyamoto was silent for a while, then shook his head and said calmly, "Watch the rain." Mai Shiranui opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she finally kept silent and watched the boring night rain with Shinichi Miyamoto. The quarrel in the back became louder and clearer in the night. A trace of distress and irritation flashed between Mai Shiranui's charming eyebrows. She suddenly asked, "Is it true?" Shinichi Miyamoto expressed his doubt. Mai Shiranui, who had been with Shinichi Miyamoto since she was a child, didn't have much awe for her master. She only had a kind of respect and concern from the bottom of her heart, as if he was her father's daughter. "I heard some rumors about you, master." In the heavy rain, Mai Shiranui whispered. Shinichi Miyamoto was indifferent. "And I saw the crown prince yesterday. He was a little annoying and frivolous." Shinichi Miyamoto turned around and took a deep look at Mai Shiranui. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Master, your status in East Island is no less than that of Gu Xingyun in Zhongzhou State. You just used some cannon fodder, and it wasn't out of selfishness. Although those generals have great power, how could they have the guts to come here and criticize you?" Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly interrupted Mai Shiranui and said in a calm tone, "Someone has to be responsible for some things." Mai Shiranui's face suddenly changed, and she was a little panicked. She muttered to herself, "So the rumors are true?" In fact, there had been rumors for a long time. In the first few days of the Battle of Changdao, the situation in East Island was extremely grim, and people in all walks of life were in a panic. After the battle, the future of the special warfare system of East Island was temporarily unknown, but the economy suffered a fatal blow, which was irreparable. And now it seemed that even in the final battle, Shinichi Miyamoto didn't show a satisfactory attitude to the authorities of East Island and suffered heavy losses. Under such circumstances, how could there be no rumors? Recently, a lot of people said that East Island suffered such a huge loss because of Shinichi Miyamoto's hesitation at the beginning and his incompetence after arriving in Changdao. There seemed to be a force secretly trying to blame all the losses of East Island on Shinichi Miyamoto. Because of this, when Mai Shiranui met the Crown Prince yesterday, he made an almost blatant hint. Because of this, the military generals who usually wouldn't be taken seriously by Shinichi Miyamoto dared to come and question him. Master, what's the attitude of the royals? My Shiranui suddenly asked. The result hasn't come out yet. What attitude can the royals have? Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head. My Shiranui didn't believe it. At this time, the royals' lack of attitude was actually a kind of implicit support. But if they really supported him, why would the Crown Prince say those words to him yesterday? The Crown Prince. My Shiranui wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Ha! Shinichi Miyamoto smiled and said calmly, in this kind of thing he's not important enough. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Shinichi Miyamoto glanced at my Shiranui and said slowly, at most, he will give up the leadership of the Divine Wind Force. He said it casually, but my Shiranui clearly saw a touch of darkness deep in his eyes. Is there no other way? My Shiranui asked softly. Shinichi Miyamoto's lips moved. When he was about to speak, two figures hurried through the night rain and quickly came to Shinichi Miyamoto. The two imperial guards around the Mikado. Glacier. Tide. Shinichi Miyamoto glanced at them and said softly, is there any news? Yes. Glacier nodded seriously. His eyes were shining with unspeakable excitement. His Highness Tianhai Wuji has just got in touch with the royals. It is expected that he will come to Changdao in 15 hours. The bright light flashed in Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes, but he remained calm and set his eyes on Tide. What did they say? Shinichi Miyamoto asked. The they he mentioned, of course, didn't refer to the people of East Island, but the dark superpowers that were still entrenched in Changdao. Zhongzhou State, which had the upper hand, was in danger. In just a dozen hours, the power of East Island would change dramatically and completely overwhelm Zhongzhou State. At this time, the attitude of the other dark forces would become extremely important. Under such circumstances, Zhongzhou State would send people to talk about cooperation with the dark forces. East Island would naturally send people to test their attitude. The five superpowers cooperated and competed with each other. Under such circumstances, what choice would they make? Withdraw from Changdao. Attack East Island with Zhongzhou State. Plot against Zhongzhou State with East Island. All seemed possible. Shinichi Miyamoto hoped that he could get a third attitude. The five dark forces conspired with East Island to plot against Zhongzhou State. In this way, the crisis of East Island would be completely resolved. Even after the war, he could deal with his negligence more easily. East Island was about to receive great support. At this time, it was possible to persuade the five dark forces to deal with Zhongzhou State together. The most important thing was what price Shinichi Miyamoto or East Island could pay. They agreed to do it. Tide said softly, more than an hour ago, the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club even killed a small part of the elites of Zhongzhou State to show their sincerity. It's just that they seem to be asking for too much. What do they want? Shinichi Miyamoto's tone was gentle, but his eyes were shining brighter and brighter. The Jiang family of South America wants Li Tianlan. They only want Li Tianlan. Tide thought for a while and said. Shinichi Miyamoto listened calmly. Tide continued. Knights Templars want to establish East Asia Diocese. This should be the will of the Vatican. The Polar Ground Alliance. King Bear didn't put forward any conditions. He just said he was willing to help. Fantasy World and the Heroes Club have the same conditions. They. Tide glanced at Shinichi Miyamoto and seemed to hesitate. Say it. Shinichi Miyamoto said calmly. Tide gritted his teeth and didn't look at Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes. He turned his head and said quickly, these two forces want Liuhua Palace. Liuhua Palace. Different from the Divine Wind Force, this was Shinichi Miyamoto's own foundation. A foundation that only belonged to him. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't get angry. His eyes lit up again, and he raised the corner of his mouth with an enigmatic smile. My Shiranui looked angry. When she was about to say something, Shinichi Miyamoto waved his hand and said firmly, if they want it, then give it to them. We can't wait anymore. Pass the order. Everyone take the initiative to attack Zhongzhou at all costs. He looked at my Shiranui, the Glacier and Tide. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.